So we're ready to roll?
Ready to roll.
Okay, all right, let's adjourn this meeting of September 11th, 2023 of the Vermont Community Broadband Board. We have all board members in attendance. That includes myself, Patty Richards, Brian, Dan, Holly, and Laura. Christine, do you want to do a roll call of staff?
Sure, and we'll do new staff introductions later in the agenda, but we have Alexi Montserrat, who will be replacing Lucy, Heron Herzog, Kristen Bringa, Rob Fish, Alyssa Matthews, Chance Payette, Lucy Rogers, and Tony Clitheroe are here.
Excellent, very good. Welcome all. First item up that we're going to take is approval of the agenda. I'm going to make a motion to approve the agenda as posted. Is there any discussion? Let me rephrase that. Is there a second? Okay, Brian seconded. Any discussion of the agenda? All right, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, ayes carry 5-0. Item 2 on our agenda is approval of the minutes from August 14th. And I see Brian was away for that one. So Brian, I'll have you abstain on that one. I'm going to make a motion that we approve the minutes of August 14th. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Holly. Any discussion of the minutes?
Yes.
Laura?
Yes, on numbers 4 and 5. There is, let me see if I can find the language. I'm concerned about the framing in that language, that it does not speak to the fact that the board had decided to move forward with determining accountability policies prior to issuing any other grants. And the framing of both of these makes it sound like the board had shifted position and was, just kind of requiring potential applicants to agree to something new. So that is, I'm just a little concerned about the narrative, the framing, and the consistency around that. And I think folks will recall that that actually is what happened back, I think 3 meetings ago.
Do you have specific wording language you'd like to propose?
Patty, I'd actually like us to not approve these minutes, or I can take 5 minutes right now and come up with time. It's at your, or we could maybe approve them at the end of the meeting. So I've just gone through the minutes and call that out.
Yeah, let's do this. Let's hold them to the next meeting. That gives you time to propose language.
Thank you. I
And
appreciate that.
we can do it more thoughtfully. So let's pull the August 14th minutes off.
Thank you.
So we rescind the motion to approve. Okay. Let's move now to the August 25th meeting minutes. Looks like we were all in attendance. Actually, Dan Nelson was not in attendance, so Dan will abstain if we get to the vote. I make a motion we approve the minutes of August 25th. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Laura. Any discussion of the August 25th meeting minutes? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstain.
Thank you. Dan Nelson abstained. Okay, that brings us to the Lamoille FiberNet construction grant application.
Yep, I'll take the lead on that and hand it over to Lamoille. But as you know, in the August meeting, we had a pretty extensive presentation from Lamoille, and we will reiterate staff's recommendation to approve the grant of $13,588,636. And the issue for the board at the time was asking Lamoille to comply with future policies, which Lamoille went back to their board, and you have a letter in your packet indicating that they agreed to that condition that the board has put in place. So at this point, I will turn it over to the board and Lamoille to take it from here.
Okay, Holly, you had your hand up. Do you want to jump in quickly before Lisa starts? Go ahead.
I do have a question for Christine, and then I have a comment. So in staff's write-up of a preliminary memo that precedes the agenda, so I'm just trying to give you a point of reference. It says, staff says, with Fidium taking all risks related to the business case. I don't see that that's true, but I also don't understand the statement.
Well, the statement is if you know, the background of that is the business case without Fidium is I would say they don't have a business case, because you look at the ARPU, the average revenue per unit required or per paying customer, it's up around $120. So, you know, so Lamoille is not taking on a business case risk here. Fidium is taking on that risk.
But haven't we reduced the risk by contributing 51%?
Haven't we reduced the risk by 50?
Haven't we reduced the risk?
Well,
by
the risk,
contributing grant dollars?
yes, but the risk still exists.
Well, I'm not sure that I like statements like this.
Well, did I say that? Yeah.
Staffs in the staff analysis, because it first of all, it just strikes me as a pitch. So I'm just going to say it just strikes me as a pitch.
Well, it is a pitch. We're advocating you approve the grant.
I'm interested in your analysis, not your pitch.
Yeah, staff shouldn't be biased. Staff should be factual.
Well, I guess. So are you saying, I don't know, should we not recommend, I don't know how to make an approval without, we could just say in the future, we recommend approval without adding any information to it.
No, that's not.
I don't think that's what's being said.
So
I think
I think Holly's point is valid. The statement comes across biased, and it's probably not accurate, right? So can we ask that it be struck? It adds no value.
Course.
It adds no value to the report.
Of course.
Unless you're a cheerleader. And so, but now to the broader point, Christine, you can provide information in a factual way that is comprehensive and complete and accurate and a recommendation can say, all of this information is consistent with the standards we've established, and therefore we're recommending it. You can recommend without bias. So let's just we're already off on a bad foot this morning, or today, it's noon, sorry. So let's just let's get through this. Let's not have little petty things. So I think Holly's pointing it out, accurate and good. We're going to take it out. Let's all keep it going forward.
Thank you, and I stand corrected. I will present things differently in the future.
So the other comment I wanted to make is that I've gone through all of the grant approvals, and the language to those grant approvals are subject to future policies being developed by the VCBB related to accountability. That's actually as conditioned or as limited as that condition becomes, which is actually more limited than the approval we made on NEK, and more limited than the approval we made on Maple Broadband. So I just want to be clear that while we have a letter from the applicant, we don't need to adopt the language of the applicant. And I would hope that we would make that language consistent so it's the same for everyone. There was language proposed by the applicant about a future plan for sustainability of the CUD, which is a new concept that we've been discussing. I think it's absolutely prescient on the part of the applicant to ask for that condition. And I would hope that we would consider that second condition in approving this grant, which I am in favor of. So that would be in your board packet at pages 9 and 10.
All right, so I'm just trying to find pages 9 and 10.
And I note that our board package is not numbered. It's numbered by Adobe, but we don't have page numbers on our.
Yeah,
That's okay.
Holly, you're referring to page 11, maybe?
No, it's the
Well,
letter. It's the letter.
It's the letter.
It's the letter
from Lisa?
to you.
Send
And
the
what
letter.
yeah,
The
and
letter
so
to you.
I'm asking, there's a lot of language here. I'm asking that we just say that our approval, if we approve this grant, that it is subject to future policies being developed by the VCBB related to accountability. And then at the board's pleasure, they suggest a condition that is subject to, I'm going to go to the language here. They just want to make it subject to this letter. And I can't accept that, but we could say that it's subject to implementation of a sustainability plan that includes governance, succession planning, compliance, and oversight. It's the top of the second page of the letter, which on my Adobe version is page 11. Has 4 bullet points in it. Beautifully drafted.
Okay. When we get to the motion part, we may need to take a moment to finesse this, but we'll get there.
Okay.
Okay, let's turn it back over to Christine. And I think, Christine, you were going to lead into Lisa, but I will let you take the floor, Christine.
Yeah, I think at this point, I will turn it over to Lisa. For any questions from the board for Lisa to respond to.
Laura has her hand up.
Lisa, do you want to tee us up at all, or are you just going to take questions?
No, so thank you again for having us back this afternoon. I just wanted you to know that I'm here in our office in Morrisville with my current board chair, Jeff Tilton, prior board chair, Jane Campbell, Fabian Bourgeois, our construction manager, and Randy Tomlin, our operations and engineering expert and board member from Elmore. So thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa, and welcome all board members of Loyal. Laura, you're up.
Thanks, Patty. Thanks, Lisa. And I really appreciate the language in here around sustainability and succession planning. This was a key reason why I did not vote for the Southern Vermont application. And that was that there was no ongoing funding or envisioning of an ongoing accountable entity to hold the partner's feet to the fire in the future. And their partner is one that still has ongoing customer service issues. I get calls weekly. So wanting to make sure that we do have an entity that is responsible and is going to be there. And, we have a bunch of heroes in Vermont that rushed forward to help stand all of this up through their volunteer efforts. I don't expect that volunteers will be ensuring that the service is on and of an appropriate quality and negotiating with whoever the next partner successor might be, their legal team. And so how long do you think it will take Lamoille to establish a sustainability plan?
Well, our board is actually, we have a, I can't get, I would love to say by the end of the year, but I think what happens is we're in our budget cycle now for 2024 and strategic plan. The approval of the construction grant really sets in motion a lot of other factors. So I would expect that given the outline of the conditions that, you know, if you want to put a time limit on it, you know, end of next year, prior to completion of phase 1 construction, absolutely. You know, you know, these are works in progress. So if there's a, you know, I would say 3 months is too little. 3 years is too late. So, so the idea, what we're proposing in our executive committee is considering this week in the governing board in September is a schedule that puts us on a 3 to 5 year plan. That's what we're looking to build. And then of course, the long-term sustainability.
Can you remind me of the revenue models for the CUD with phase 1? What kind of revenue you'll be receiving after the completion of phase 1?
We don't receive revenue. That's not, we're not receiving revenue from this.
Okay. And are there any other sources of funding that you expect to come into play to support the CUD?
Sure, that's right. So currently our, excuse me, pre-construction funds and holdback is what will fund our operations for 18 to 24 months. And during that time, the idea is to identify revenue opportunities, other grants, other forms of revenue. And also not just revenue, but reducing costs through cost sharing and partnerships, whether it be our planning commissions or other CUDs.
This is a key issue for me going
Mhm.
forward, and will inform my vote. I want to say once again, I appreciate all of the work that has been going on at Lamoille, your work with other CUDs to help them through this process. And I'll listen to the rest of the questions from the board.
I just want to follow up quickly on Laura's question. So this is going to be for both Lisa and Laura and other board members. Do you think a 1 year requirement for a sustainability plan would be sufficient?
What do you mean? That it's in place within 1 year or that it is sustainable for 1 year?
No, that they develop a sustainability plan. They develop the plan and submit it to us within a year.
That would seem really reasonable to me, Patty. The question that I have is with this, you know, with phase 1 coming in and no revenue going to the CUD, it's really hard for me to think about where sustainable funding is going to come from to ensure that these communities that have come together to resolve the issue of, you know, lack of coverage from ISPs that weren't doing their job or didn't find a market, you know, how do we make sure that they're around in 10 years? And so 1 year would be fine. 2 years would be fine if I had some sense that there's going to be revenue to support them at the end of that time. And so the lack of any kind of revenue in phase 1 is my concern right now.
But if the plan addressed that and identifies and speaks to the 4 items that Lisa put in her report, her letter to us, that the plan, it's not going to solve it, but it's going to basically state how they're going to deal with governance and succession planning, compliance and oversight, revenue opportunities. It's going to address each of the 4 items in her letter, program planning.
If I may, we, as part of our construction application and pre-construction application, we have funding to support our operations and our compliance and oversight through 2025. So we feel like we have the runway to develop a plan and identify additional revenues and opportunities for the long-term sustainability. Our agreement, our contract is 20 years with an automatic renewal of 10 years. So that was the idea, was that during this period, that would give us the runway to develop the plan that we've proposed. So whether it's 1 year or 2 years to develop that plan for you, that's fine with us. But our vision is the long-term governance, compliance, and oversight.
Thank you, Lisa. Laura, then Holly?
Lisa, do you think that Lamoille would be able to come forward with a sustainability plan prior to applying for funds for phase 2?
I would hope so, yeah.
Would you accept that as a condition of this grant that I don't know if we can do that. I see Holly is frowning at me. But maybe some sort of recommendation from the board, and perhaps it's something that we can address ourselves prior to phase 2 funding. Would you have any concerns about that as a requirement in phase 2?
So I would see that as a condition precedent to phase 2 rather than a condition on phase 1.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to do the work. And our board, when we evaluated this opportunity in comparison to the business plan that we had, part of our relief was we're not carrying any debt. We have a solid foundation and a budget funding allocated for the next 24 months. So we feel like we're in a really good position to develop a very strong long-term sustainability plan, other revenue sources, other grant sources. So, and because we haven't begun the work, it's hard for me to speculate as to what does the solution look like. All I can say is that the board is ready to do so. So happy to.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. And Patty, I'm sure this is inappropriate, but I would love some sort of, if I could get one, I would love some sort of reading from the board about whether or not they would see that going forward as something that they'd be interested in putting out as a condition on the next round.
Meaning for future construction grant issuance?
Yeah, I think I could probably see my way to voting for this today if I felt like we actually are going to hold Lamoille themselves to the fire in terms of you've got to come back and tell us how we get to keep you in the long run with this before we bring any more funding forward. So I know no one's going to make big commitments, but I'd love to hear any arguments against having that discussion very soon.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Holly?
So I have 2 comments. Actually 2 questions. One is to Christine. Christine, has this board ever approved a grant to a CUD that did not have its operating agreement signed at the point of the vote?
Yes, that's well, I should ask Rob and Kristen to confirm that, but I believe we have done that. Kristen, Rob? Yeah, Kristen says we've approved them before operating agreements. The operating agreement is based on the terms that the board approves.
So if we've omitted this condition, here's condition number 3, that there is execution of an agreement reviewed by staff that is consistent with the application, because devil's in the details, and I have every reason to believe that Lamoille is holding its ground and that the parties are really collaborating well together. But you need to see the language of the contract to know if there was actually whether the bargain was in fact documented or papered the way it was presented. So that would be a third condition. Laura, I don't know why you're negotiating against yourself here. I think you're being offered a 1-year period in phase 1 to get a sustainability plan together, and I think you should grab that. But you may have other thoughts on it. I think it sounds like a really good idea, and I want to assume that if that's a condition of this substantial portion of the grant funding, it could be true that Consolidated is not so strapped by the business case here that they can't find some money to put towards the CUD. It just seems reasonable, especially since the CUD is going to be fielding all of the, I'm going to call it public interest issues that come its way, and taking that obligation of administering the grant. So yeah, I think that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Holly. Lisa, did you want to respond?
Just to the filing of the contract. So that is if I understand, a current grant condition. It comes with, I think it's called Schedule C, compliance with the state and federal grant requirements. So we have to file our executed agreements with the BCBB for that purpose. So I would ask that but there is no requirement that we execute these prior to applying for a grant or getting a grant approved. That's not in the RFP or in, so I think the sequencing of many grants is that you get the grant and then you execute the contracts. So we're happy, because I'm just letting you know that we have to file that agreement anyway. Happy to do so. Would prefer it be post-award, obviously, consistent with others.
Yeah. So the condition wouldn't bother you because you're going to do it one way or the other.
Right. What we're going to file it. We have to file it as in a normal what I would call Schedule C requirement, right? That said, I don't want to wait for approval of the grant until I've executed my agreement. Is that,
No,
that's what I was wondering. Okay, perfect. If that's not what you're saying, we're all good. Thank you.
Maybe before the funding is distributed. You can't get funds on an agreement that isn't signed.
Right, true, right.
Right, and Christine, is
But I would
that
think
the way,
that's an operational, yeah.
Christine, is that the way you are rolling out all the grant funds?
Yes,
Before
yes.
you give out a new role, they got to show that they've got the operating agreement signed.
Yeah, we put, that's all attached as part of the agreement.
But here's the difference. You now have a lawyer on staff who can review the agreement and make sure that the agreement meets the conditions. I don't know who was reviewing the contracts before, but, and it's not that I don't have faith that other people on staff can't read it. Of course they can, but it's more than just seeing the signature page.
Yeah, I think Tony understands that's her responsibility.
Yes, and I will be going back and making sure, Holly.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, any other questions? Laura, did you have your hand up or did you take it down?
I did. I am going to respond. I don't think I was negotiating against myself, Holly. I'm trying to talk myself into voting for this grant. This issue is really, really important to me. The CUDs themselves are our most important measure of accountability and ensuring that Vermonters have service going forward. So, and
So let me ask you, Laura, very specifically, rather than having it a condition prior to phase 2, what are you, I'm interested. Well, what is your what is the benefit of waiting until
no,
phase?
I'm not advocating for waiting. I'm not.
Oh, okay.
I am not. I was kind of stumbling through, is this something we could add to today's agreement? I'm happy to not add it to today's agreement. I was asking Lisa, you know, when you come back for phase 2, would it phase you if we had that as a requirement? I will just say, I'm really disappointed that that staff has not ensured some sustainability of the CUDs in these agreements or helped. And so I hope that going forward, prior to additional grant funding applications, that staff will do what they can to assist in this. And with that, I think I have said enough.
We could make the motion conditioned on the earlier of the development of the sustainability plan, the earlier of 1 year from now, or request for your second round of phase 2, whichever comes first. Address both. Okay. Any other questions, comments? All right, I'm going to put a motion on the table that we approve Lamoille Fiber Nets construction grant application of $13,588,636. Conditioned on the approval. The approval is conditioned on subject to future policies developed by the VCBB based on accountability, as well as development of a sustainability plan within 1 year or prior to phase 2 construction grant application, whichever comes first, and execution of an operator agreement consistent with the grant requirements. Holly?
Could I'm tracking your language carefully, and I think you wanted the policy, there's a word before accountability that I thought sent us off the deep end. So I think your first condition is subject to future policies developed by the VCBB related to accountability. I think you got an extra 2 words in there or something.
Okay, I'm
And
happy to take that amendment.
And a second amendment in the second clause or second condition, could we say that the sustainability plan as described in the letter from Lamoille?
Yes, I'm happy with that. Thank you for that. Good catches, Laura.
Yeah, I will just note that many of the other CUD applications that have come in have in fact had sustainability plans through viable business plans. The end.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second for the amended motion, amended by Holly?
Second.
Thank you. There's a second. Is there further discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor of the motion and the grant to Lamoille, please say aye.
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 Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Congratulations, Lisa.
No, thanks to the team here and thank you very much. Looking forward to it.
Great. Look forward to working with you.
Good work.
Okay, next up is Otter Creek.
Okay, as the staff recommends the approval of the grant request of $9,952,273 for Otter Creek, and I will turn it over to Laura and her team to talk about the grant and answer questions to the board.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Laura Black. I'm currently the governing board chair of Otter Creek Communication Union District. The Otter Creek Board is very happy to be finally presenting our construction grant application today. I'd like to quickly acknowledge Otter Creek's board, which is comprised of all volunteers. Our members have served many roles: secretary, treasurer, vice chair, representative to Vacuda, webmasters, IT assistants, and many of us have put hours in investigating addresses, identifying off-grid locations, and existing communication lines. We've worked with town clerks, we've sent mailings and published survey requests to our town newspapers, all to gather pertinent information on the addresses in our towns. The CUD is comprised of 17 member towns and 1 city: Benson, Brandon, Castleton, Chittenden, Fairhaven, Goshen, Hubbardton, Mendon, Paulet, Pittsford, Poultney, Rutland Town, Rutland City, Shrewsbury, Sudbury, Wells, West Haven, and West Rutland. The Otter Creek District area consists of both rural farmland, mostly in the western towns, and of mountainous terrain in the eastern towns of the district. Properties range from agricultural to vacation homes, those around the lakes of Hubbardton and Benson, and those near the state parks in and near Mendon, Shrewsbury, Chittenden, and Goshen. Mostly, though, the Otter Creek District consists of areas where Vermont residents, their families, and businesses live and work, but lack access to high-speed broadband. Even the town offices in many of these towns are without access to broadband. This is really apparent from the slide that shows the lack of any cable or fiber infrastructure in the towns of West Haven, Benson, Hubbardton, and Sudbury, in the west section, as well as in Goshen. Also, Chittenden and a large area of Mendon appear to show a lack of service. These areas are, however, mountainous, mostly state parks, and properties are without utility grid power. Otter Creek has partnered with Consolidated Communications for our Universal Service Plan, as you know. So how did we end up partnering with Consolidated? In April of 2022, Otter Creek's board issued a request for proposal seeking 1 or more partners to enter into a private-public partnership to provide broadband services to the district unserved and underserved areas. We were pleased to have received 2 formal responses, and we engaged in a series of meetings with each respondent to further define the terms that each respondent offered. As our discussions developed, Otter Creek felt that we got better terms with Consolidated, particularly around asset ownership. Essentially, only Consolidated offered a partnership structure where the grant-funded assets would be publicly owned. Thus, although Consolidated's proposal did recommend that Otter Creek consider working with other providers to serve areas outside of their territory, we chose to move forward to contract negotiations with Consolidated for the entire CD. Over the past months, we have worked together with Consolidated to develop our plans for construction. And more recently, we have added to the terms of our agreement, thanks to the valuable collaborations with Lamoille Fiber's excellent executive director, Lisa Birmingham. Thank you, Lisa. As the address lists and areas became defined and the budget numbers came together, the project to build out fiber to the unserved regions materialized. The map to the left shows our total universal service plan to build out to cover all the unserved on-grid addresses in the CUD. So green describes the network that Consolidated has already served with fiber. Orange lines are the fiber network that would be built from the funding grant that we are requesting today. The blue lines describe the areas that can be built with future funding. To the right shows just the current grant request build out. Otter Creek's goal in this phase is to prioritize the most unserved areas of the CUD. Again, we recognize Hubbardton, Benson, and Sudbury represent these most unserved towns in the CUD. Although these areas do fall outside consolidated service territory and thus will require longer to build, we opted to include them in this phase just to ensure these most unserved areas would be served without delay. Other areas that we prioritized were Goshen. The town has no fiber nor cable access, as well as the southern areas of Paulet. So why are we so confident about our partnership with Consolidated? Several reasons. First and foremost, Consolidated service offerings are one of the lowest cost services in Vermont. This slide shows the service offerings. Phone service can be added to the residential service for just $15 a month. Television streaming also available. Consolidated, of course, is participating in the Affordable Connectivity Program. Free installation at the home, free Wi-Fi router, 2 extenders, and a very generous standard service drop of 500 feet are all important values for our constituents. In addition, I'm particularly excited that Consolidated has agreed to provide a free courtesy service in each town. These are intended to be for public use, for example, as a hotspot and an accessible location in the town. I think of the value of a free Wi-Fi at a town's emergency shelter with backup power, something that would have been really helpful to town residents during the recent flooding. Otter Creek also recognized that Consolidated has the labor force, the materials, and the expertise to build the fiber network quickly and efficiently. Thank you. Let's see. Our next slide. Our funding request shows another value to partnering with Consolidated, who was able to contribute a substantial portion of the cost of this project. As you can see from the slide, Consolidated's contribution to this phase is approximately 30% of the total cost of the project. As well, in our recently approved construction grant amendment, we were able to allocate some pre-construction funds towards the engineering and make-ready costs, which allowed the construction budget to stretch just a little further. That allowed us to include the complete build-out in the town of Paulet. Again, we had reviewed the actual number of unserved addresses in each area of BDF and chose to prioritize areas with the most unserved addresses. Let's talk about contract terms. The structure of the Otter Creek Consolidated partnership, as well as the terms of our contract, are the same as those for Lamoille Fibers. I believe the terms have already been presented and discussed at the August meeting as part of Lamoille Fibers' presentation, but I can briefly review some of the highlights. So, ownership structure. The CUD owns the fiber from the CO to drop pole. Consolidated owns drops, backbone, non-grant distribution, pole rights, interconnects, COs. This structure remains intact in perpetuity. End of a contract. It's a 20-year contract. Auto renew is for 10 years. In case of non-renewal, the CUD can select and negotiate with another ISP or renew with Consolidated on updated terms. For defaults within the 20-year contract, the CUD has full path IRU to provision end-to-end service from CO to customer premise, including the drop. Consolidated loses exclusive right to access and must cooperate with transition. As for accountability measurements and terms, Consolidated must maintain annual relational net promoter score at 15 above the average ISP score. 2 years below triggers a default. Consolidated must maintain performance, speed, and latency. 3 failures within 1 year triggers default. Just a quick reminder, the terms negotiated for Lamoille and Otter Creek are stronger or the same as those of Southern Vermont's. I have that slide if from Lamoille's presentation, if you want to look at it. Just a couple other contract commitments. Contract includes commitment to the same service price and speed offerings that Consolidated offers elsewhere in the state. The contract includes contract to be signed, of course, commitment to product offerings equal to those in the New England region. So speaking of continuity and commitment, and was discussed just previous, I just want to reiterate that Otter Creek is wholly cognizant of the importance of its own sustainability. Our letter that we submitted dated September 2nd addresses our commitment to planning for governance and succession plans for sustaining compliance and oversight of our partners' operations, for seeking and securing funding to maintain our operations, and for developing program planning to support digital equity for all of the CUD's current and future constituents. The same letter also includes our commitment to current and future VCB policies, as was asked of us at the August 14th meeting. So finally, in conclusion, I just want to relate to you that I've personally been answering emails. I see this as the CUD's position. We are now another touch point for our constituents, and they are reaching out to us for many, many items, but mostly to ask for when will high-speed broadband be made available to their homes. They're just residents. Some are trying to do business and work at home. Another is out hoping to offer her infirm husband a means to occupy his time and have a connection to the outside world. One person contacting us was hoping to relocate to the area, but only if high-speed broadband was available. The Benson Town Clerk reported to me a speed test of 9 down and 0.7 up, although they are listed, they are on the VCBB address list of having 120. I know that their town office is unable to have online digital land records. Even our town, our own treasurer is unable to work from her home. I am looking forward to when we can post a schedule on the Otter Creek website describing when construction will start and when access to broadband service is expected to be available in our constituents' areas. Thank you for your consideration of Otter Creek CUD's request for funding for this important project. Happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. Excellent presentation. Let's open up the floor to questions. Laura, I'll start. You noted that there's a requirement of Consolidated to do speed tests and reach customer service standards. In the event that they did not reach those tests under the structure you described, it'd be in default.
Yes.
Is there a remedy associated with default? What does default mean at that point?
Well, default, my understanding of default means that the Otter Creek has the opportunity to negotiate a contract with another ISP.
So I just wanted to find out more about what, in the event that that situation happened, what would you do as the CUD in that situation? You would negotiate, so you would pursue a new contract with somebody else?
Yes, potentially. I suppose maybe one could renegotiate with Consolidated, but I think seems like that would be unlikely, that you would go back to your partner who has already defaulted.
Okay, thank you. Laura? Laura, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thanks, Patty. And Laura, thanks for all your work and all of your colleagues' work with the CUD. With the pricing that you showed for Fidium, how long are those prices guaranteed?
They're not guaranteed prices. My understanding is that there are no, I can't imagine where any pricing is guaranteed. Pricing follows a market. I think what we described is that their pricing has to remain, where is it? So it has to remain in the same low tier of pricing in Vermont, and that includes the cities of Burlington, the cities of Rutland. So there is, significant competition in those areas. And the pricing needs to it can't be higher than any of those.
I have, Patty, I have two more questions, one for Laura, and then I have one for Christine. And Laura, I'm wondering if you could go back and show us the map of the phases.
Yes.
Okay, and so if I recall correctly, it's the teal that is phase 2, is that right?
Yeah, we'll call it phase 2. We don't
And
have
what's the
funding
green?
for that. Correct.
What's the
The
green?
The green is where fiber already exists.
Okay, and I interrupted you when you were saying, when you were explaining the teal.
Just that you're right, we can call it phase 2. It's those are the addresses and the areas that remain unserved after this construction grant.
And
we will be seeking funding for that area.
Is there any planning going on for phase 2? Or do you have any plans that envision phase 2?
Well, it is, the costs are all identified and high-level engineering is done for those areas. And I guess we are all, watching the BEAD funding, obviously. And I'm hoping that we will be applying for BEAD funding for that.
Okay. And just going back to the question that I had asked Lamoille, do you have any revenue coming in to Otter Creek as a result of the phase 1 project?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Thank you. And then my next question is for Christine. And Christine, can you describe the process that staff undertook to help Otter Creek consider partnerships with other CUDs to ensure viability and strength in this region of the state and sustainability? Can you talk about the process you all went through there?
Can you, I'm not sure I understand your question. Can you clarify it a little more?
So I believe this is also a non-viable business plan. Is that right?
Well, with the current proposal is, I still don't quite understand your question.
So my question is, this is a very small CUD proposal, very sparse, very weak business case. And so what I wanted to know is what process the staff went through in helping this CUD contemplate working with other CUDs around it, which might have been to the benefit of both CUDs. Can you just talk a little bit about the process that you undertook to do that?
We didn't do any process in that area. That's, if you look at a bad, I shouldn't say bad business. If you look at a case where the high cost areas are, whoever you put those on is going to be problematic. If you take an existing CUD and you add high cost areas to it, it's going to make their business case worse. So, by definition, it's kind of a law of financial physics. If it's a high cost area, it's high cost for no matter who serves it.
So no analysis was done
We certainly did the business case analysis
of working with other CUDs in this area.
Yeah, I guess I don't really, I feel like that's I'm not gonna answer that question. I don't know what it means. I really don't know what it means,
Okay,
because I
so
don't,
let me see
yeah.
if I can, ask the question more straightforward. Did staff have any meetings or make any efforts to bring Otter Creek and any of the surrounding CUDs together to see if there could be increased sustainability for the CUDs in them working together? Did staff do anything with Otter Creek and the surrounding CUDs?
I'll leave that to Lucy and Rob Fish to answer, because I was not in that level of detail. Rob, Lucy, do you have anything to offer for that?
So I think I would probably turn it to Rob, because I think the work that took place, although I'm aware of it, took place before I was on staff. So
Yeah, okay.
Rob, are you on and available? Otherwise, I can try to summarize.
I guess Rob's not available. So the answer, we don't have an answer for you on that.
So yeah, I think I know Rob's on. My guess is he's trying to unmute, but I think that the answer is that I think this is, Laura, I as I understand your question, it's about kind of looking for partnerships, but potential. Oh, Rob is messaging that his mic isn't working. I understand your question to be about looking for partnerships between neighboring CUDs. Rob?
Yes, I'm here now. Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
let me just clarify,
Sure.
looking for what work staff did with, a very weak CUD business case, looking at the other CUDs around it to see if there was an ability or an option to bring those together, working with those two CUDs to, or three CUDs to improve the business case anywhere. I just want to know if the staff worked with any CUDs and Otter Creek on trying to improve the business cases.
Sure. From the beginning, there has been discussions between Otter Creek and Southern Vermont, Otter Creek and Maple, and now Otter Creek and Lamoille on the best way forward. From the beginning, Otter Creek's business case has been weak. They were the first CUD to have quite a large fiber build throughout their area, which limited the options. They also, as each CUD has somewhat different priorities. And that is something that staff respects. But that being said, we have encouraged throughout the process, as you could see between these two proposals, for them to discuss with Lamoille, to discuss ways to share resources with Lamoille, and looking at it to the future of how that they can work together with other CUDs that are in the same type of partnership to ensure accountability.
Okay. So, then I'm assuming that staff would say this is the strongest business case to be made on the western side of the state.
Yes, I can get into detail if you'd like why, but
so
thank you, Rob.
two weak CUDs and then a third CUD is the best business case on the western side of Vermont.
Well, it's not. This is a strong proposal. So if you look at, this, all I can say is I wouldn't call this a weak CUD. I would call this a strong proposal.
Does this CUD have a sustainability plan? They have no revenue coming in. There are two CUDs on the western side that have no revenue coming in.
Well, I think you can ask the same question you asked Lamoille about. They will have a sustainability plan. That's what we're working on.
Well, in the case of Lamoille, I'm aware of interactions between them and the other CUDs around them. So that was more the nature of my question. Yeah,
Laura, I'll let you answer. Well, I guess I'm saying they're in the same. We're working with them the same as we're working with Lamoille. They will have a sustainability plan. If you want to put the same requirements you put on for Lamoille, I suspect, I don't want to speak for Otter Creek, but I suspect they won't resist that.
Well, I guess it just will be my hope that if the board moves forward with funding this, that we aren't creating 3 weak CUDs. that we aren't working against ourselves here in terms of accountability and sustainability of the public entities on the western side of the state. And with that, I think I have finished my comments.
I'd like to ask if Laura Black would respond to that. And I want to note that in Otter Creek's letter, it does state that they will include a plan, a sustainability plan, our condition of requesting a sustainability plan, and the same provisions of Lamoille, Otter Creek has pledged to. So Laura Black, would you just respond to your intentions of developing a sustainability plan?
Yes, absolutely. Patty, you said it. Really, I appreciate that this subject has come up, and especially at the August meeting. And I suppose unfortunately, it hasn't been an enormous topic. Our focus has been, I think, for many of the CUDs, has been to build this fiber network and get it here and there. We've got several years in that process and to get there, but we absolutely need to shift gears and work on our sustainability plan. And along with you bringing it up, Laura Sbalia, we have discussed it internally within our board as well, to some extent, and we have a lot more work to do. Certainly, I have outlined it, the items to address in our letter, and that's the work that we need to do, and we're moving forward. Certainly, we need some time to get there.
Laura Black, would you be supportive of the condition that we made for the motion on Lamoille, to the timing of whichever comes first, within 1 year of approving the construction grant, or your application of phase 2 construction, whichever comes first, to develop the sustainability plan?
Yes.
Okay.
I hope that our application for our next grant doesn't come too soon. But yeah, because as Lisa said, 3 months is not enough. A year is, fine, and plenty of time, we believe. So yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Laura Sibelius still has the floor. Laura, keep going. You're muted.
Is it possible to take the presentation down? I don't know if Holly still has questions on the presentation. Yeah, Lisa, Laura, thank you very much. And, I am aware, that we have asked Vermonters to really do a heavy lift here. And I appreciate the work that you all are doing. My consternation is not with you all. So thank you for your work.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Holly, you're up. You're muted, Holly.
Laura, I believe it would be helpful to the board if you would just say whether you are aware of the terms of the contract that Lamoille has negotiated with the Consolidated, and if the Otter Creek contract has any substantial differences.
There is one difference, and it's in the construction terms, and it is in the liquidated damages that are assessed onto that. Do you remember Lisa describing the last 2% of a build in an area where Consolidated committed to I forget exactly, I have to go and read it myself, it's like a double funding of what is left in that 2%. There is not, we can't do that in the out of territory area. That's the only difference.
Do you
But
understand why?
Yes, pretty much. I might have to bring in someone from Consolidated to describe it more specifically. I want to recall, though, that our payment terms are essentially kind of more strict than have been presented, I think, by the accountability terms that you guys had started to draft. But it's a, I think we pay like nothing until 50% billed, at which point we pay 20, and then everything is withheld until the in-network is completely done, lit, and so on. So
Good point.
that's pretty substantial. I believe that the out of territory, it might be just because the risk is that much higher in that area, that maybe
So,
that the Consolidate could be delayed, I believe is the issue.
okay.
Because of just whatever goes on in out of territory building.
I'll take it as an answer.
I'll
But I
see if
I'm mindful that, you know, I don't know why the contracts aren't consistent overall. But let me, my
everything else
colleague,
is exactly the same, just to be clear.
what was that?
Everything else is exactly the same, just to be
Okay.
clear.
My colleague Laura Sibilia brings up a great point that is unfortunately planted in the middle of your grant application. And that's what our process is with regard to structuring these deployments. And I hope you'll humor me in just answering this question. Did you, Laura Black, ever have a conversation with the folks up at Maple Broadband about what it would look like to try to make that all one CUD?
Yes, as Rob described, I can't say it was me. I wasn't. I certainly wasn't chair. I was present on the board, but our chair did have discussions with Maple Broadband
Okay.
about working together. And I know that occurred as well with Southern Vermont some years ago, and before I was on the board.
Yeah, we could get into the details of what then happened and so on, but I don't think we should hold up our meeting at this juncture. But if this is going to continue to be a point of conversation, I think we need to put staff on notice that we want more details about the process of organization of the CUDs. And this becomes a really deep well to fish in. So I'm really aware that it is difficult to imagine a future where Maple with one operator could merge with Otter Creek with another operator. So we are creating a bit of a patchwork here, but I don't see a near-term solution. And I think we should approve the grant and keep going.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Laura Black, I'm going to frame in a few minutes or less. I'm going to frame a motion consistent with the last motion for Lamoille. Would you be in agreement with that motion and approval process that was made for Lamoille, just inserting Otter Creek in place of Lamoille?
Yes, thank you, Patty. I understand, and I listened carefully when you framed it for Lamoille, so I assumed it would be the same for Otter
Okay.
Creek. And yes,
Sure. Great. Before we get there, I just want to make sure that you're in support of that.
yes.
All right, I'm going to make the motion that we approve a construction grant to Otter Creek Communication Unit District of $9,952,273. And help me, Holly, with the three requirements. Subject to development of future policies of the VCB based on accountability.
Based on, Patty, could we just ask staff to take the language that was proposed for that motion and embed it in the Otter Creek so they are identical?
That would be perfect.
Yep, we will do that.
So
Okay.
it's subject to the three conditions regarding future accountability policy, a sustainability plan referencing the language in the September 2 letter from Otter Creek, and the execution of an operating agreement consistent with the terms of the grant application.
All right, that is the motion on the floor. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Further discussion? Laura?
Yeah, I do want to test the deep well. Laura, to the best of your recollection, what was the outcome of the discussions between Otter Creek and Maple, if you could? Why aren't they working together?
I'd be glad to answer that. We
Oh, okay.
yeah.
I can't say that I have much information on it.
The other CUDs were not interested.
So Patty,
Go ahead,
excuse
Laura.
me, if Maple is on this call, can we ask Maple?
I think that's fair, if they're on.
Is Ellie on?
Yes, whoops. Sorry. Yes, I'm here.
So just, were you around, Ellie, at the time of these discussions between the two CUDs?
Yeah, so there were some discussions some months ago, and we never talked about a full merger, at least not during the time that I've been involved. We talked about the 4 towns that were part of Go NetSpeed's ILEC service territory. And we had a look at those and determined, and again, it depends on the amount of the grant funding that would be involved, but those towns had a large portion of grant funding that were associated with them in the original calculation. So we looked and said we would be interested in having a deeper look and deeper discussions about those, because on balance, adding those to our business plan might very well strengthen it. And then Otter Creek, they went back and discussed amongst themselves, and they came back and told us sometime later that they decided not to work with us because our consumer pricing was higher than what they wanted to see.
Okay. And do you, I don't know if you saw the presentation today on the non-guaranteed rates from Fidium. I'm presuming your rates are higher than that.
Our rates today are certainly higher than that. I mean, again, and we had this conversation with them at the time that our rates are based on what we need to have in order to make sure that our business plan is sustainable. And of course, the more grant funding we have and the more successful we are, we do intend to drop rates over time, as well as have greater affordability plans and packages. But at the same time, we obviously don't want to be putting our own business viability at risk by having lower rates to compete. So the idea is that the prices we see today are essentially represent a high watermark, and they would drop over time because our we don't have a profit motive. Our motive is to get access to everyone. And but of course, there's no promises we can make in terms of the timing of that.
Thank you, Patty. I appreciate that. That's helpful information. And I'm cognizant of the fact that we have a motion on the floor. And I'll just say, I feel like we're creating a problem on the western side of the state here, that we are actively participating and problem creation and extending the issue that has been plaguing Vermonters with the deterioration of our legacy landline phone provider. So I'm very nervous about that. I shouldn't say I'm nervous about that. I'm really concerned about that, and I'm disappointed. So.
Okay, your concerns and thoughts are on the record. Appreciate that. It's a good item to call out for us. Okay, is there further discussion? All right, hearing none, I'm going to make the call. All those in favor of the motion for Otter Creek, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
No.
We have one opposition, 4 in support, 1 in opposition. Motion carries. Congratulations, Otter Creek.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that brings us to item 5 on the agenda, which is related to BEAD, the BEAD initial proposal, volume 1.
Yes, I will turn this directly over to Lucy.
Okay, so hello, everybody. We are at the point on initial proposal volume 1 for BEAD that we were at with the 5-year plan at the last meeting, which is that we are seeking board approval for submission to the NTIA. So just a kind of reminder of where we are in the process on volume 1. And I will say after this, we're planning to preview, kind of pre-public comment period preview BEAD volume 2 for you all as well, but kind of figured that we would take volume 1 first. So where we are on BEAD volume 1 at the July 10th board meeting, as you'll remember, we gave kind of a pre-public comment period preview to the board of BEAD initial proposal volume 1. We then put it out for a 30-day public comment period between July 19th and August 18th, and also solicited board feedback at that point in time. We received comments from 5 entities, from Tilson, VCUDA, CTIA, Education Superhighway, and NECTA. We've incorporated comments from these entities, and the final draft that was included in your packet at the end of it also includes kind of a summary of the thematic comments we received and what we did to incorporate them. And in your board packet is the initial proposal volume 1 to be voted on today for submission to the NTIA. Similar to the 5-year action plan, I think if it's the board's will, I would open it up for questions. I'm also happy to kind of, as we shift gears during the meeting, just do a quick summary reminder of the content of volume 1. So Patty and the board, it's whatever your preference is. I'm happy to just open it up to any questions, or to give a quick overview of the reminder of the contents of volume 1.
Okay, would anybody like a summary relative to volume 1? We have seen several versions of this, had an opportunity to give feedback. And I understand, based on what we're seeing in our packets and the link to the material, is there's several sections that are not going to be included in the actual filing to BEAD. It's the tables, but that's clearly noted what's going into the BEAD filing and what's more for our education and framing of the document.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Patty. And I will say, unlike the 5-year plan, volume 1, that it's really just the format of the submission is a form from the federal government. So that's why that's noted that way, is that it's going to be kind of a copy and paste of the text into a form response from the federal government.
Great. Questions, comments? All right, I'm going to make a motion that we approve filing of the BEAD initial proposal volume 1 as provided in our packet. Is there a second?
Patty, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to bring up one point prior to, if it's okay, prior to that, which is one of the main components of volume 1, as we've discussed, is the challenge process for addresses, and one of the components that we've included in volume 1 is kind of our process for challenging fixed wireless. And I just wanted to share that since we published our board packet version, we've had additional conversations. I guess in general, I want to just share appreciation that Clay Purvis, our federal program officer from the NTIA, has just been incredibly wonderful to work with. I assume he's on the call, but we've been able to just really have a close dialogue with him and try as much as we possibly can to kind of resolve issues prior to submission. And so Clay had suggested that some additional context to the fixed wireless language would be helpful for the reviewers at the NTIA without. So I guess if the board is okay, I would like to request that we have permission to add in context and data as to why we are choosing to pursue the fixed wireless challenge process that is provided in the proposal, without in any way changing the process that we're proposing to undertake. So basically, we would be providing data about the successful challenges that were submitted during the FCC challenge process last winter, and then some kind of technical data about wireless propagation through foliage.
So would you characterize that as the motion would be made with the caveat that there is additional information that will be developed relative to fixed wireless challenge process?
Yep, and just to be clear that this would be submitting additional reasoning for the process we're proposing, but that the nothing would be changing about the process we're proposing. We would just be providing why we are proposing it.
Okay, so the underlying data remains the same. It's the framing around the fixed wireless challenge process.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, it was a suggestion that it may help us with review and approval, and our preference is as much as possible to address all of these issues prior to submission to try to have as smooth of an approval process on the other side.
All right.
Thank you, Patty.
Is there any concern with that before I make the motion? All right, hearing none. I move that we approve the BEAD initial proposal volume 1 is presented in our board packet, with the understanding that there'll be some additional language explaining the fixed wireless challenge process by staff. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Laura. Is there discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Ayes carry 5-0. Thank you. Congratulations. Great work, everybody.
Thank you, and thanks for your work throughout this process. Christine, would you like me to go directly into volume 2?
Yes, please, with at the will of the chair, if that's okay.
All set.
Perfect. So with volume 2, this is very much different stage in the process. We are at the very initial kind of preview for the board stage here, and we've been working very closely with our consultants, the Vernonburg group, and who are now sharing the slides. Thank you. So our plan was that I wanted to provide a little bit of just kind of background, timeline, and context to reorient us all to where we are in the process, and then I'll turn it over to Greg from the Vernonburg group to help go through the specific sections of volume 2, and we'll open it up for discussion. Laura, did you have something?
Yeah, just a question about process. So do we want to go through the presentation prior to questions? So I've reviewed and have some questions. Should
On
we
volume
go?
2?
Yeah.
I was imagining it might make sense to go through the presentation first,
Perfect.
but we're here.
That's fine.
Whatever your preference is.
Nope, that's fine.
And okay. So I think at the very least I'd like to just if we can go to the next slide, I'd like to just talk about the timeline for a minute, because I think that will be helpful to board members and probably everyone on this call. So this is just a quick reminder. You've seen this slide before of the different components of 5-year action plan, volume 1 and volume 2. Go ahead. And then just looking at timeline, the BEAD 5-year action, these are the BEAD deliverables, and then we'll talk about digital equity for a second. So the BEAD 5-year action plan, we successfully submitted to the NTIA on August 28th. Thank you for your attention on that at the August meeting. And we've heard that it has made it through the initial review, which is kind of the completion check, and is now in detailed review. And we are hoping to hear by the end of September, hopefully that it's accepted, or if there are edits needed, we are hoping to hear that by the end of the month. So hopefully we'll have an update for you at the next board meeting. Volume 1, that is what you just voted on. We will be submitting that to the NTIA this week, and then it will begin its review process at the NTIA. And then volume 2, the process, the proposed process going forward would be that today we preview for the board and kind of hear comments, and also, some of the, hopefully we'll have an understanding from the board if there's pieces that the board wants changed or further developed prior to the public comment period, or if there's pieces that we can kind of continue working on concurrent with the public comment period. But our goal is to post the draft for public comment on Friday, the 15th, hold it open for 30 days until October 15th. And then we will work to incorporate those comments from public comment and bring the draft for submission to you all for consideration at the November board meeting. Obviously, there's the October board meeting in between there, and so at the board's will, we can leave space at that meeting as well to kind of continue any conversations that it seems like it would be after today, it would be helpful to have more board time on. Then the after that, the challenge process can begin, and that's the process that you all just voted on that was outlined in volume 1. And then once we run the challenge process and have our address list, we're hoping next spring to be able to run subgrantee selection and actually propose to the NTIA who our BEAD subgrantees will be. And I just wanted to point out that when we submit our final proposal to the NTIA, which we're expecting will be mid-year 2024, included in the final proposal is who we plan to subgrant BEAD money to. So all of that then goes back to the NTIA for approval next year. And I believe this is described in more depth on the next slide if we want to go ahead. Yes, so this is kind of looking a little more in depth at the timeline of the challenge process that was just approved for submission in volume 1. So prior to the challenge process, as you know, we modify locations and we deduplicate. So we remove from BEAD funding addresses that already are under a contract to be funded with public money. Then, but just thinking about timeline, the challenge process itself is completed within 120 days. So that's kind of November to March timeframe. And the challenge process we can't begin the challenge process until volume 1 has been approved and volume 2 has been submitted, but volume 2 doesn't need to have to be approved. So our goal is hopefully we will get volume 1 approved by the time we submit volume 2 in mid-November. And so our goal would be that then we could start that challenge process in November, expect it to go through depending on, through early March, really, at least. And then we can publish our final address list, which has to be done 60 days before we allocate grant funding. And so that's just to kind of show how all of this timeline does add up. So the work we're doing to submit the volume 1 this week and submit volume 2 in November all kind of lines up and adds up to doing subgrantee selection late spring, like April, May of 2024, and then submitting our final proposal to the NTIA after that. Are there any questions, or are there any questions on BEAD timeline before I go on? Okay, then let's touch briefly on digital equity, which we are also working on in parallel. And this timeline actually may have to be revised because we're working with the federal government to we've requested our 180-day extension for the digital equity, which would have put the plan due in March. And we're kind of working with the federal government to see if we can get the full 180 days or how much of an extension will be granted. So this timeline may need to be revised, but this is if we were to get the full 180 days, that would be putting us for a March submission on digital equity plan, which would be putting us at a December initial presentation to the board and then February, March vote by the board. But we will certainly keep you posted as we get this timeline to be more refined and detailed. And so with that, I think you can go ahead to the next slide. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the Vernonburg group, but I'll very much still be on the call to answer questions, but they've prepared kind of a overview of the content of volume 2 and tried to target some places specifically for board discussion. Patty, I see there's a hand up.
Go ahead, Holly.
You're muted, Holly.
I'm appreciating how complicated all this scheduling is, but it would be really great if we overlaid that scheduling with board meetings. And the staff could help us out by overlaying that with grant applications they see coming down the pike. To have the digital equity plan be considered in December, January just seems incredibly aggressive. And I understand there's other factors, but I can't really respond to that without seeing the whole picture. So I'm just saying I'm concerned. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll say, I think that's, we are equally concerned. I'm glad to provide you an overlay for the next meeting of the schedules, but I think Lucy, maybe you can talk to the NTIA requirements around this. We're the whole country, you should know that all the states are struggling with this timeline. But go ahead, Lucy, if you want to address that.
Yes, I mean, so we've requested the 180-day extension, which is the maximum extension we're allowed by law to request, and are working extremely hard and diligently to receive that extension. And I think it's up to the federal government, but I don't know, Alyssa, if you wanted to jump in and talk about the timeline, or Brittany.
Is this the timeline with the extension or without it?
This is the timeline with the extension.
With the extension.
Correct.
It can only get worse.
Yes, unfortunately.
So I'm just, I don't know about you colleagues, but I'm feeling quite swamped at the moment. And now, yeah, I'm just worried. I'm just worried about the traffic flow at board meetings. That's all. Thanks.
Thanks, Holly. I think we've been.
I'm understanding Vakuda's concern about some of the things that we've added in our schedule in the third and fourth quarter. So I just, and I hate, it's only becoming clear to me when I see that digital equity is going to get slammed into the holidays. That's my real concern. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. I have two things before I promise I will pass it over to Vernonburg Group. The first thing is just I had meant to mention this at the start, but anyone who, for anyone from the public and board members as well, the slides are available on our website under the today's links. So if anyone is looking for the slides, that is where they are. And then secondly, I just wanted to, before we pass it to Vernonburg, just share our great appreciation for working with them. And I think it's fair to say that we've kind of worked very well as one cohesive team between VCBB and Vernonburg on this whole process, and are just extremely grateful for the partnership there. So I think, Greg, my understanding is that you're going to lead a kind of brief overview.
Wow. Thanks, Lucy. And we would say back, it's been great that you guys have given us clarity so that we know how to try to bring your vision and your goals to the paper. And so really, this, as Lucy said, is the very early days of what Volume 2 would look like. Obviously, this is to get input at these earlier stages to make certain it's reflective of what the board envisions Vermont's broadband BEAD plan looking like. And so this is a very, I have to say, as a high level matter, the guidance and the NTIA work around this, while extremely instructive, is highly detailed. And so this is going to have, I would say, like just a whole lot of meat and potato that is going to be very hard to digest. And so that's why I think we wanted to get this to you guys early so that you could see just sort of the level of detail that's being put into this part of the plan. Because this is really, how do we go from the concept of 100-100 to every location in Vermont? How do we actualize that into a plan? So with that, I guess we can go to the next slide and we'll start the discussion. And I guess this will be a presentation and we can do questions. If there is something along the way that you really are like, I need to stop and talk about that, please feel free to raise your hand and I'm happy to pause and we can have a conversation about it. But so in the initial proposal, Volume 2, we're going to walk through, it's about 16 requirements that have to be outlined. These 8 are the high level ones that are sort of the most critical to the plan. And so we wanted to flag them for this conversation, but we'll actually walk through all, but these are sort of the key components of it. So with that, we can move on to the next slide. So requirement 1, which is the objectives, this really syncs up to what your earlier vision was, which was memorialized in the 5-year action plan. So again, mobilizing resources for end-to-end broadband infrastructure, ensuring sustainability, community-driven solutions, broadband services and devices throughout Vermont. So this is pretty familiar territory to you. It's just a reaffirmation of the 5-year plan. So that one's kind of straightforward. Maybe we can go on to the next one. And then here, requirements 2 and 4, they're kind of similar. This is about sort of outreach planning and what are you doing to ensure that the community voices are being heard in this conversation. And so VCB, the Regional Planning Commission, and the CUDs are all sort of working together to get input from the local communities to make certain what we're trying to achieve here is achievable. So again, our VCBB and Vernonburg Group sitting in on some of those discussions is constantly working with the CUDs, VCUDA, and others to make certain that we're getting that local input. We recognize that the CUDs are uniquely positioned to be sort of that frontline discussion with the local communities. So that's a great channel of feedback to have come back to us. And we're putting that as sort of how we intend for them to play a role in developing this plan as we move forward through the initial proposal. Next slide. And then this one is requirement 8, and requirement 8 is subgrantee selection. And what subgrantee selection is about is really about how do we design on the front end, how we're going to have folks apply to serve these locations. So that's pre-award solicitation. And then once we receive those bids, how do we go about doing the evaluation of those proposals? And within that, we have a number of requirements that we're outlining in the draft itself. And then post-award, how do we ensure that Vermont gets what the companies or the CUDs or whoever is the winner promised they would deliver? So that's a lot about compliance and monitoring of the activities. And on that one, I'll just put a flag in case I forget. And I heard it earlier today in the board call that there was a discussion around accountability measures. And so this draft is very much signaling that the board will have, we want to make certain that those accountability measures sync up with what the board is ultimately deciding around accountabilities for grant applicants. I do see Holly, I think, has a hand up.
Thanks, Greg. You know, I don't see why it isn't appropriate to use the word accountability measures right in here someplace just to get used to it. And I also, in a couple slides back, as you're relying on the CUDs to develop these plans and measures, I just wonder about where do you get input from the local ISPs? And I only raise this because I know our legislators, some of them at least, care quite a lot about those smaller, particularly smaller ISPs and the local ISPs. How do they get incorporated into this planning process?
Greg, do you mind if
That's
I just jump in here real quick?
Sure. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, so I think, Holly, one clarification it's important to make to what Greg was saying is that that slide really focuses on, okay, we're planning for all these specific projects. We're getting applications for specific deployment projects in a given area. How are we coordinating those projects with other ongoing infrastructure deployments? How are we making the local government aware of what's going on? And so CUDs as kind of entities of local government, I know they're above municipalities in this kind of unique structure, but they're these local government entities are really uniquely positioned to make sure that that coordination of the planning and the coordination of the deployment element happens. But the stakeholder engagement discussion is separate, and that's where we're really getting the input from the private ISPs. We've been meeting with them consistently throughout this project. We've met with all of them individually, and we're continuing to do so. So I think that clarification is just important there.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. That is good clarification. I know that VCBB itself has been reaching out to those ISPs to make certain that their perspective is reflected in planning at these early stages. I know Rob has been leading a lot of that effort. So maybe the next slide, this one has 2 slides dedicated to it. So what we wanted to call out specifically for the board is that this requirement 8 section is where you will find where VCBB is defining what a project area is. And a project area in this draft, we're proposing that it be a CUD. And if you're not a CUD, then the town. And if a town is divided amongst a wire center, so we even thought about like the network infrastructure, then there may be an opportunity to look at something that's smaller than the town to take account of the existing infrastructure that may be there. In addition, we know that serving on-grid locations is very different than serving off-grid locations. So we envision a selection process that will make that distinction and give prospective subgrantees an opportunity to craft proposals based on that. A term that comes up throughout the NOFO that NTIA is having states focus on is an extremely high cost per location threshold. The goal here, as we set out in our draft, is to serve as many locations as possible with 100 by 100 fiber. And so the proposal that we've put forward, and this is we've come to this in discussions with NTIA, is that we would not set that threshold at the beginning. Instead, that threshold would be set to reflect the proposals that we receive. So that's something that'll be done once the proposals are in. There's a lot of reasons to not set it on the front end around sort of getting sort of bids, bringing some rigor to that bidding, trying to create competition in that bidding. So we've decided that NTIA's guidance there was probably best. And so if the board agrees, then that's where that would land. In terms of scoring criteria, there are sort of primary categories and secondary categories for scoring. NTIA, the NOFO, has a directive that 75% awarded, 75% of points that are awarded come from 3 categories. One is minimal bead outlay. So it's to sort of up your matching funds. Second is around affordability, and third is fair labor practices. As you'll see in the proposal, we've weighted affordability higher than minimum bead outlay, and that's based on some information we have around matching, that it could be very difficult in a number of locations throughout Vermont to get something in excess of that 25% match. And so we've tried to put some weight around affordability and still bring some opportunity for bids to distinguish themselves on minimum bead outlay, but not sort of overweighting that given the on the ground realities in Vermont. On the minimum bead outlay, there is a 25% match requirement. We've got a proposal that we're working on and have met with NTIA now a couple of times on to see if we can figure out if there's some room for flexibility in how we go about accounting for that 25% grant or match. So what we're thinking is maybe on a per proposal basis, you could have something that's less than 25%, but on a statewide basis, you would hit the 25% mark. Those are active discussions. The draft reflects where the proposal that we're putting forward, and we look forward to hearing from NTIA on more of that. Regarding a letter of credit, I don't know if folks have seen, there's been a lot of interest in this issue across the country. In fact, a letter was sent to NTIA, I believe it was last week, in which over 200 signatories, maybe, signed on. A number of the CUDs in Vermont, as a matter of fact, signed on to raise concerns about this letter of credit. And essentially what this does is it requires that folks would have this letter of credit in place throughout the term of the project, full amount of their bid, which substantially increases the cost, locks down a lot of capital, and raises some real concerns. NTIA heard through that letter that this might cause folks to not bid simply because they either can't come up with the letter of credit or can't maintain letter of credit at the level that NTIA is insisting on. So in the draft, you'll see that we've signaled that we would like to seek a waiver on that to find some more flexibility with some alternative proposals, maybe performance bonds, delayed reimbursement schedule. And so that's in there. And in terms of compliance and reporting obligations, I think the big takeaway here is that you will see that there are things that line up with what Vermont requires. Their Bulletin 5. There's rigor that's being put in that's consistent with the RFP under the Act 71 grant program. But we wanted to make certain that that list remained and signaled clearly to the board that your input on accountability measures, that this will want to sync up with what those decisions are. And so that's the key part, I would say, in that. There are a number of certifications and other requirements that you'll see. I heard from the previous discussion on the Otter Creek project, financial plans, business plans, those sorts of things. Those are all also in requirement 8. And so that might be an area of interest for folks to look at. Let's see, we can go to, I guess, the next slide, which is requirement 9. Okay, so on requirement 9, this is 9 and 10. Requirement 9 talks about non-deployment sub-grantee activities that we would do with funds. Really, this would envision if you have funds left over, what would you do? BCBB and Vernonburg Group have done a number of modeling, and we think all, if not most of this money is going to be accounted for in your deployment projects. However, we have set forth some digital equity, some workforce training opportunities as part of the, if there is money left, then we would do these sorts of things. We'd also just flag in this section under eligible entity implementation activities, there is 2% of the grant funding is eligible for VCBB to do in terms of using it for its administration. And so we just reiterate that we tend to up to that 2%, that's how we tend to fund these activities. And so so basically this one is really any funds left over, we will do what we can around digital equity and workforce training. And Holly, is that a hand up?
It is.
Great.
So how much is 2%?
Let's see.
Roughly.
It's a little over $4 million, 2% of 229 million. So
what's your annual budget? What's our annual budget, Christine?
Our annual budget is, of course, there are other sources of funds, but our annual budget is running about it's 3 million this year, but it should run to be about 2 million on an average.
Greg, is 2% the max?
Oh, that is, yeah, that's what the guide says, 2%.
Okay. And there's, we had a lot of conversation in our grant application process about the sustainability of CUDs. And I'm wondering if we're missing an opportunity here to build in sustainability of the CUD model, not just the BCBB model, but the CUD model in this program.
Holly, can you say a little more about that?
CUDs don't have cash. Many of their operators don't have any obligation to give them cash. And in Vermont, we're dependent on them they're not getting revenue from the operation of their systems necessarily. So we don't have any way to ensure that our citizen partners are funded to continue to monitor and participate in the network development.
I just want to jump in here and note that not all of our CUDs have no revenue coming in.
No,
The majority of them do.
I'm just posing a question, like, is this a possible, is it that we expect the sub-grantees to use some of these funds? Is it possible for them to use some of these funds for operating costs? Or should we be working at the VCBB level to ensure that we get a portion of this money that we can sustain CUDs, which is going to be important through this process? And with only 2% even available for the VCBB, it's a big question about whose interests we serve here.
Yeah,
But,
Holly, I think it's a good, sorry, Gregory, I'll let me say something and then turn it over to Greg to add context. I think it's a good question and one that I would certainly be interested in kind of thinking more about and talking more about, and also understanding a little bit more your thoughts to see if they could be incorporated. I think a couple points, the BEAD program is also 5 years, so there's still additional important sustainability planning to be done beyond the period of BEAD funding, and then I think there is I guess that's what I would say, and I think within that it would be helpful maybe to have a follow-up conversation and see if there's something that we can think about in line with what you're suggesting.
Like most federal funding, there's
usually like some threshold, and here we're talking about 2% for the VCBB. There's usually some threshold about how much of the grant or the sub-recipient's grant could be used for operating costs. And it would be great to be really clear in our plan that we either expect to get that and we expect the CUDs who are not otherwise funded to use it, or something like that. So that's where I'm going, and just wanted to bring it to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. And I think, one of the things, so really unfortunately, the BEAD program is really being designed. There are operating expenses that can be part of the bid, but those operating expenses are directly related to the deployment of the network. So for example, a truck roll, the employees, those are general operating expenses, and those can be accounted for in what you're bidding, but they aren't sustainably accounted for, to your point. And I think that is something I know has been the background of a lot of conversations we've been having, is how do we ensure the sustainability of these networks once they're built, and a recognition that just vending the CapEx side of their budget may not be sufficient. And so I think it's a good flag to raise here. So I think we can go on to the next slide. There we go. Okay. So here, 11, 12, and 13 all sort of focus around sort of labor and who, sort of the things that you're doing to sort of include more people into this program. And so we set out some, requirements that subgrantees will be required to demonstrate their plans, that they have good and fair labor practices, and that they will adhere to federal laws as well as any state laws concerning employment and those sorts of things. And then there are making it very expressly clear that we not only are designing, but we intend to share and do outreach to minority and women-owned businesses to try to engage them in the procurement process. Next. Cost and barrier reductions. This really, for a number of states, this is going to be sort of forward-looking. I think the good news and the good story for Vermont is that a lot of the work that you have been doing over the last decade to try to streamline and address some of the barriers to deployment are things that are going to be reflected in the plan for Vermont. So there's not really any sort of, there's ongoing work in a number of these categories, like worker training, make ready, which we understand there's still work to be done there, but like the pole attachment rules that you already have in place, as well as some of the other changes around deployment that you've made in your rules and your laws. Those are things that are going to be highlighted to NTIA as practices that Vermont's already undertaken to sort of reduce cost and reduce barriers to deployment. And so that's really what that section speaks to. Next. On climate assessment, obviously with the recent floods, we know that climate change is having an impact in Vermont. And here we talk about how we try to insist that subgrantees demonstrate how they will address resiliency in their networks, how they will make certain that these are reliable networks, and how they can withstand some of the challenges that the climate presents. And so that's primarily the focus of that section. And so just encouraging subgrantees to think about those things as part of their network design, so that we are not losing the network. Instead, we're doing repair to the network in the event that they do face those challenges. Next. And then requirements 16 and 20 talk about the low-cost broadband option and middle-class affordability. And Holly, in some ways, these are important to your question about sustainability. Part of what middle-class affordability is trying to do, as well as the low-cost option, is get more people on the network so that there is a stronger subscriber base of revenue. As you'll see in the proposal, and looking at Vermont and the demographics and the dynamics and some of the costs associated with running the networks here, what the proposal recommends on the low-cost broadband service option is monthly recurring costs not to exceed $45 for low-income families. And so, that's the ACP program, and that's going to be a requirement for participation in the BEAD program. And that's going to be at 100 if you're on grid, 120 off grid, with the late requirements associated with those. One thing I do want to flag on the low cost option in the initial proposal volume 2, the recommendation now is that not only do all applicants or subgrantees have to participate in ACP for services, but they would also have to participate in that program on the device side. And that is not something that is prevalent in the Vermont participants in the ACP program. So we flag it. BCBB is going to have discussions with CUDs and the other ISP providers in the state to sort of better understand why they're not participating in that as actively as some other states and their broadband providers are. And so just want to put that there's a flag in the document for that outreach and discussion to occur. I see that there's some hands. If I go through middle class affordability, if that's okay, and then maybe I can get to the questions, or do you want me to pause here? Okay, middle class affordability. Just real quick, and looking at this, NDIA has asked that all states require that any subgrantee have a middle class affordability plan. I'll tell you, over the evolution of this portion of the document, we started in a place where we were thinking, okay, what's the dollar amount that we can insist that providers charge on sort of a basic plan that helps seniors that maybe have a lower threshold of demand on the network, or folks that maybe just aren't using it as intensely as others, some sort of a program that they could participate in. And in the course of it, our evolution shifted to thinking, well, there is a diversity of income levels throughout Vermont and in these regions. And so why not key this off of like median income and leave flexibility with the providers to sort of develop their middle class affordability plan with a clear vision towards there has to be sort of a diversity of offerings. So not everybody can just be 100. There might be some lower speed plans, higher speed plans, but then really have a plan that you've thought about, like demographically, if the median income in my area is X, what can I do to ensure that there is a plan that median income family of 4 could afford, or that median couple or that median individual could afford? And so we've really put some flexibility there, but with some guidance around how we expect subgrantees to think through that. So with that, I'll ask Holly. We're up in the maybe.
So I know you didn't make up the $45 threshold, right? And I didn't hear, there was a statement you made that I didn't hear, so I'm a little concerned that there is another condition here that I'm missing. But is there any room? So if you are making a $45 low cost option mandatory, the federal government, you're essentially requiring that these rate plans take advantage of a huge swath of payers or customers so that you can augment your pricing structure for a low cost. This is not built for rural Vermont. This is not built for our CUDs. And so I'm wondering whether we should signal an average aggregate per state, or if there's any other exception opportunity here, because to simply say it, I mean, I will have a really hard time supporting this myself. And just because it's a rule doesn't make it right. The other thing that's true is that the experience I've had with low-income households suggests that many low-income households want to apply their ACP support to their mobile phone. And so you could have an applicant that for whom you know, their customer base is not going to be materially impacted by this requirement. So I don't mean to make this policy choice the problem of staff, but it's a problem, and we need a creative solution.
Holly, I will say, everything you're saying is right in line with what we've grappled with, both VCPP staff, Vernon, and in our conversations throughout the outreach and engagement portion. So yes, yeah, everything you're saying is kind of right in line with, I think, this tension between wanting something concrete enough that it actually is meaningful to low-income customers, and that we're not, you know, that it's very clearly going to have a positive impact on affordability for low-income customers, and also making sure that we're leaving providers the flexibility to be able to actually serve areas, which if we don't have infrastructure, then we are left with nothing. And so I think it's very much an active conversation, and I think there's, as we think about going into the public comment period, there's a decision to be made of, you know, this is a piece that we definitely will be hoping to receive public comment on, and there's a decision to be made of what do we want to put in the public comment draft, and how do we want to kind of frame that conversation to give us the most useful public comments on it.
Well, there's lots of opportunities for rural states to collaborate, and I'm wondering whether rural states have come together to object to this sort of provision.
So the $45, Greg, can you speak to kind of what the requirement is from the NTIA and where we do and don't have flexibility?
Yeah, the requirement is really that we develop a low cost affordability option for low income families. The guidance set out sort of a model proposal, and that's what this is patterned on. It is not an obligation. And so we do have the flexibility to craft it in a way, but it's very clear that what the federal government is looking for here, what NTIA is seeking in that guidance, is sort of what we have put forward. And so I think, you know, they've obviously been open to us having discussions with them, and understand that there are some unique challenges in Vermont. I guess what I would say based on those conversations is that the further we deviate from that guidance, the more of an explanation we need to provide around why the deviation is necessary.
So I
but
guess
there is room for negotiation.
Yeah, my response to that is, okay, better get explaining.
Yeah,
because we need an explanation. And you know, we can get creative from proposing. You know, it's one thing if you're a provider that can take the low income applicants as a part of their pool nationally and see it as a small fraction. If we have a service provider who's an applicant and can take low income households as a percentage of a total potential customers, and it's a more material impact, perhaps that's a way to do it. But you know, the numbers that we see for sustainability in CUD world don't come close to this, and they don't come close to this in the near term. So if you said that this was to make a plan to have this kind of rate available in 5 years, okay, maybe. But it's also true that the scale of the service area should be a factor. But anyway, we could go on, but this is very concerning, and it's not required.
What is the
Yes.
board's preference? I don't know if we want to Greg, I would like to, I'd like to return to this and see if we can understand the board's preference for what to put into the public comment draft. But Greg, would you like to finish the slides, or should we stop and talk about this while we're already having the conversation?
Maybe, I seem to recall that this is really, we're getting down towards the last of the slides. In fact, yeah, maybe we should pause here, Lucy, if that's okay, if folks want to, because the next two slides are really pretty high level, like certification type requirements. And
so I really would like to kind of understand the board's will on this, because I certainly have the same concerns, and I'm kind of struggling with the same tensions that Holly's articulating. And I think, this is an issue that has come up in our public outreach and engagement as well. And so I think it is a piece that we will be hoping to get public comment on during our 30-day public comment period. And so really, I think the question right now is, what is the most helpful and productive proposal to put forward in the public comment version of the plan that can help kind of guide us towards a solution? I think, we had left in this $45 thinking this is a plan that with absolute certainty meets the NTIA requirements, and then it's putting something on the table for reaction. Two, we can change it. Greg can provide guidance on how much we can change it. I don't know if we feel that we need a number, or if we're able to. Greg, I guess that's a question. Do we need to put a number in there, or can we leave it? That is another option, to leave it that that each entity proposes a low cost option, but it could be different from one subgrantee to another.
So I was looking at the guidance while you were talking, and it says that the lowest cost service option at a minimum must include all recurring charges as well as non-recurring costs or fees to the subscriber. Basic characteristics, whether a subscriber may use the ACP benefit, which is a conclusion that we have as well, and any provisions regarding the eligibility to upgrade to a new low-cost plan. And Alex is providing the detail. This is from the NIFO itself. Yep. And so this is what NTIA put in writing as what it expected to see here. And so I think, oops, there we go. Okay. So each provider can, again, the subgrantee is supposed to put forward how they will address low-cost service options in their area. So it could vary. And what I guess what NTIA is suggesting is that their variation would look like this. And so if you're not going to have this, then it needs to be something to, it has to be explained.
Okay, so I think
each project could have its own.
Recognizing that, I know it's really hard to, maybe we can take down the screen share. I know it's hard to kind of look at small print and specifics in a board meeting, but I think I guess the question, I mean, really the question for the board right now, and it's truly, this is under development, we can go either way. Really the question for the board is, would you like us to put out what we've given in the draft, this $45 per month proposal that we know meets NTIA requirements, but that we also have concerns about? Would you like us to put that out as to receive reaction to it from public comment, or would you like us to remove that from the plan prior to posting the public comment version and put out something more generic?
Lucy, what about a range to give somebody, some context of what we're thinking relative to the data that we have, rather than a single price point?
I think I think that would be fine, and recognizing that different providers might have different providers in different parts of the state with different territories.
Right.
But Patty, we don't even know how to set that range, and we don't even know what the rate range is for our existing existing CUDs. So I think it's fraught.
I agree.
Yeah, we have
I
received some
suggest-
feedback.
Rather being tied to a single number, a range gives us some flexibility. Somehow put something as a suggestion in rather than a
Well,
hard,
or,
fast.
or a percentage of its lowest retail rate, or, you know, or are you going to suggest that it applies to carriers with a customer base greater than X? You know, I think this is really hard to navigate on the fly like this, but I'm wondering, Dan, Brian, Laura, and to you, Patty, if this matters to you. I don't like being associated with a proposal to go at this flat rate when we know it spells failure for some of our participants, and we're supposed to be supporting CUDs, facilitating CUD deployment. So it's really, it's really pretty concerning to me. But if it's not concerning to you, you should say so.
I
share
agree
your
with you,
concern.
Howard. Yeah, I do as well. And I think if there's some way to soften this and give some sort of suggested range, or, you know, I'm not able to read the words that you put up on the last shared document that gave suggestions of what we have to have in there. I'm on my iPhone to read it and I just can't read it.
Well,
Maybe
and
I can just quickly.
I think staff should come back with a proposal to put in, and then it's probably a timing problem, but you know.
So I have a suggestion, Holly. Let me see if this would work with you. My suggestion would be that we work with that staff work with Vernonburg to kind of understand how we can soften this while, you know, still complying with the requirements of the NTIA, and come up with a softer version of this for the public comment period. And that will allow us to make sure that we're receiving feedback from entities throughout the state. And then at the October board meeting, the October board meeting falls in the middle of the public comment period. So that would be an opportunity to kind of continue this conversation while we're still in the kind of soliciting comment and feedback portion of the timeline.
That sounds fine to me, Lucy. I mean, you could put in here that may be as low as $45 per month, you know, some fudge words around it so that you get the response to $45 a month you're looking for. But it sounds to me like you've already been getting feedback about it. I don't know whether NTIA considers the feedback that you get when considering the application. So I'm a little bit at loss how important that feedback is. But,
I think we can work to understand. I mean, there's a certain extent we have to follow the NTIA guidance, and it appears that there's more flexibility. You know, maybe we're not taking the full amount of flexibility that is available to us. So I think we can work for the public comment draft to put forward language for response that maybe takes a little bit more of the flexibility we're granted and still works within the NTIA requirement. And I think, and to consider that it's that it will be an ongoing conversation, that whatever we put forward for the public comment draft, as with anything we put forward in the public comment draft, is not final. And that's why we release drafts, in order to give anyone in Vermont the opportunity to respond and provide input.
Lucy, I encourage you to use a range rather than a single number.
Yeah.
Anybody else have thoughts or comments they want to?
I think that's a good suggestion, Patty.
Thank you.
So I'm looking forward to you going back to the requirements and seeing maybe not a range, but the most flexible approach you can offer. And even though this is just not final and for comment, it reflects on the VCBB. It's where the VCBB starts. So just please keep that in mind.
And I know if the board is comfortable with it, I know that we began to talk about BEAD at the last affordability subgroup meeting as well. So I think it would make sense to continue to bring that conversation there as well.
I don't want to complicate this with that, but okay, fine. I hear you. I'm not looking for that policy discussion to inform this document because we won't be in sync time-wise.
Okay, understood.
Yeah, thank you though for the thought.
Okay, thank you.
Right, you guys want to keep going, Greg?
Absolutely. So you can go to the next slide. So there is an opportunity for you to get 20% of your funding to go towards specific areas of the state that consist of at least 80% unserved locations and where the poverty level is 150% or lower, or at or below 150% of the poverty level. In Vermont, we've identified just a couple of areas. One is the town of Warren, Vermont, which meets that requirement with more than 19.4% of the locations living below 150%. And then 2 CUDs, the DV fiber as well as NEK broadband would both be eligible for those funds. So when those funds become available, those would be project areas that we would look to use those funds on. Next. So this eligibility, regulatory approach and certification of compliance, again, these are really more about like, what are the certifications that you're going to demand, folks? Again, we're looking at some of the past practices in Vermont and trying, while not exactly parroting those here, because there are some differences in how the programs are run, making certain that we're trying to minimize the burden as best we can, while still ensuring that we get the compliance that we need to ensure rigor and accountability in the programs. There are some state laws in other states that sort of gate who can participate and muni participation, those sorts of things. Vermont doesn't have those laws, so we're not waiving any laws here. And so that's really what those 2 sections are about. And again, we'll continue to seek VCC board input on VCBB board input on those ability measures. And I think that is the last slide.
So would it be appropriate? Tony and I had a big conversation this morning about the differences in ARPA and BEAD. Would it be appropriate to loop ARPA requirements into that last slide, or is that counterproductive because BEAD is already less burdensome than ARPA? Tony, would you? Yeah, it's complicated. Tony, would you please, when you get a chance, consider whether VCBB should look to ARPA funding requirements for
We'll definitely look at any overlap between the 2 programs, Holly.
I'm looking for ways to make this document pull in or push back on inconsistencies in the 2 programs.
Okay.
So can I hop in here? So as you can tell, I'm very confused by your comment, Holly. So are you talking about the funding that has funded the VCBB and the grants that are going out to the construction grants and pre-construction grants?
There are federal requirements under ARPA. There are federal requirements
under BEAD, both are oriented towards accountability, and they're not the same.
Yeah, the ARPA funding that has gone into the VCBB, it's pretty general. There are 2 tranches that have come in.
Well,
One
we're
is,
really talking about I was really talking about the accountability pieces, and we've been studying these in our policy committee in great detail. So, especially with regard to liens. So that's why I'm thinking about this here, but you know, that's why I'm deferring to council to sort of look at this and go, and I can't imagine that if BEAD were a lower standard of accountability, would you want ARPA conditions in? Or if
Holly,
ARPA,
yeah,
yeah.
Holly, I believe that the BEAD accountability, that BEAD is ultimately going to incorporate probably those same accountability conditions that we were reviewing with respect to liens under ARPA. But I don't believe there are other specific accountability provisions in ARPA that aren't consistent with what are in BEAD. But I will certainly take a close look at that and make sure there isn't anything falling through the cracks.
That's perfect. And I'm just looking at this slide as maybe maybe a place where you can talk about or deal with it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll be very interested in the results of that. So is that something we will get at the board level, or is that something to get offline? I'm not sure that I'm following this. So it seems to me that BEAD is much more stringent. And the funding that has come in to the VCBB is much more flexible, the 2 different types of funding that have come in. So
I'm happy to report on this at the next meeting if that works for Holly.
It works for me. Or Laura, we can meet with you to take it offline. Just to fill you in on what we're talking about.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
but I do
fine.
think it should be an update to the full board, so we are all on the same page.
Happy
Yeah.
to do that.
I think we should know that. Yeah.
Thank you, Holly.
Thank you.
So next up is the changes and getting a draft ready for the 30-day public comment period. And I think with that, that's the end of Vernonburg's presentation.
Well, are there other, are there other general board member comments? I know, Laura, you had said at the beginning you had some, so.
I do, and a number of them have emerged. But I just want to call attention to the fact that as you've gone out and have been talking with getting public comments, how current the issues of accountability are for Vermonters. I noticed that was really prevalent in the draft in terms of public comment, how upset Vermonters are about the lack of accountability right now with our current providers. So I'm really happy to see that stressed in there, and I'm not surprised to see it reflected as part of public comment. I think page 32, do you anticipate having multiple proposals? Yes. Actually, I'm not going to ask this question yet. I'm not going to ask this question. Okay. Low cost I had on there. So page 80 and 81, in terms of the accountability policies, I was asking how those are, how those correlate with the work that the board is doing on accountability, the accountability measures that we have in. And one that I don't actually see in there that that I'm wondering how that ties into BEAD is the sunset provision in the Act 71 language. Is that noted in the BEAD plan? Is there a conflict with the sunset provision and the BEAD plan?
That's a good question, Laura, and one that I would need to, can I take that and
Yep.
and take it back and look into it and take it as
Yep.
a helpful check?
Yep. And I think that is it for me. I would just note that we know that the large national telcos have the ability to drop rates to kill competition in a way that a small ISP or our CUDs cannot do that. So I'm interested in kind of the long-term nature of the commitment on the low-cost plans and any kind of scaling potentially that can be done according to the size of the business or number of customers. So thanks.
Thanks, Laura.
Great comments, everybody. Any other comments, feedback at this point? Brian or Dan?
No comments.
Okay, great. Hearing none. Thank you very much, Lucy, and everybody, the Van Vernenberg group. Fantastic work. Gives us time to read through this and issue our own comments individually or as a group.
Thanks, Patty. That's exactly what I was just going to say. We will send the board an email. It should be Friday when the draft goes up for public comment, and very much would absolutely welcome any either follow-up conversations or written feedback during the public comment period as well. And definitely this is kind of the first conversation, but very much welcome ongoing comments and thoughts.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's conclude that topic. It's item 6 on our agenda. See, it's 2:30 and we're pretty much right on schedule, which is great because we have a full agenda. Next up on our agenda is ex parte communication. And this is an item that we talked about in July relative to material that came out after board packets were issued. And I took on the task to do a deep dive, or maybe not a deep dive, but some sort of cursory dive into what are the practices regarding open meeting law, Robert's Rules of Order. And in your packet is a memo from me in consultation. I developed this memo with Tony, and she did the work on the open meeting law, and I've specifically called in the memorandum feedback on open meeting law relative to including information after a packet has been sent out. And I don't want to go through the entire piece on this, but essentially in the memo, we said open meeting law does not prohibit board members from considering documents after the agenda has been posted, as long as those documents are fairly related to an item on the agenda. So there needs to be cohesion with what we're talking about for material to come in afterwards. And it also talked about the duty of care relative to the public versus staff. And the material basically said staff certainly can send material after a packet has been sent out, but it should be cautioned to do it in an emergency situation where something imperative has come out that the board needs to see, but it's going to be taking action at the board meeting after the packet has come out, rather than, oh, we forgot to put something in, we want to give you this more piece of information. It should really be left to, the board has discretion to take documents, but from staff, it should be on an emergency basis. And the general public, it should be more open for the general public because they're not in the meat and potatoes of our regular meetings and up to speed on our policies. So as long as the general public has something relevant and pertinent to an item that's being taken action on, we should allow material coming in from the general public that's relevant to an item on the agenda. So just a general piece of document, no. But if we are taking action on a particular item, then that can come in after the fact. And the same goes with agenda items. They essentially urge, they being the open meeting law and Robert's Rules of Orders and just general public meeting process. It is, we have discretion to add to our agenda or take away from our agenda, but it should be done with basically a duty of care, and not frequently doing it with thought and reason and pragmatism. And so what I've done is I put a recommendation in the memo, and I'll read that. If I can pull this up a little larger. So my recommendation is, in general, I recommend that we avoid sending out documents after the board packet is posted. Having all material in one central place, the board packet, assures all board members and stakeholders have the opportunity to review relevant information being considered and discussed. I wanted to add to that we include an exception to give us some discretion to take in material after the fact. And those exceptions would be: 1, an emergency item from staff that requires an action, or 2, documents from the general public that relate to an item on the agenda proposed for action. And then for agenda items, I also recommend to avoid adding agenda items at the last minute if possible, but noting there are times it may be necessary. To add an agenda item, it will take majority of the board members present to revise the agenda. In addition, the item must meet a standard of needing immediate action, such as an unforeseen emergency. So that is my recommendation of the practice that we pursue relative to documents, and how we handle documents with board packets. With that, open it up to discussion, and certainly before we open it up, Tony, do you have anything that you wanted to add?
The only thing I would add is that I even though it's certainly within the board's authority to decide that it's only in emergency situations that late submissions by staff be considered, I don't think that the board needs to go that far. I think the board can just reserve that on a case-by-case basis, because things happen all the time that don't qualify as emergencies, but that may be sufficient. The board may present sufficient grounds to allow the document to be considered during the meeting.
Thank you, Tony. All right, let's open it up now for discussion. See Holly's hand up.
So I really liked what you wrote, but I wasn't as crazy about what you said. Here's what I'm trying to avoid. For example, while I really appreciate people wanting to support applications that are coming before the board, I don't really like the fact that there's same day distributions or day before distributions of documents in general support that are forwarded by staff. If somebody has a late breaking comment, I suppose they could do that in public session, or bring it to the board for consideration at the top of the meeting. Maybe we need to move our public comment session up before we start making decisions, so that people can do that. But personally, I was trying to get rid of the sprinkling of documents that we then have to figure out where do they go and what do they pertain to and who are they coming from anyway, and shouldn't everyone then have direct access to board members for supplementing comments? And that's the real concern on my part, is this sort of free for all about what gets considered, because we don't all have the same documents, which was a point you made. So for my money, I like the idea that what's in the board book is in the board book, unless there's a compelling reason for it amending the board book to include additional documents or subject at the top of the meeting.
Okay, my change of tone on the public body or the public document piece is that the open meeting law expressly identified and took issue with that. That the general public doesn't have the same, they're not familiar with our policies, they're not familiar with the open meeting law. They're just not aware of the timeline. And that there's anything that we're taking action on. And I agree with you, Holly, the sprinkling of information is very difficult to manage because most of us look at the board packet, read it, and then if you just didn't happen to see that email, you've missed out on a particular piece of information. I completely agree with that. But the open meeting law does specifically reference the general public has a little bit more gray area on that because, again, they're just not familiar with the standards and the laws.
Isn't that what public comment session, isn't that really why there's supposed to be a hearing with public comment?
I think public comment can be looked at for several reasons. It is the short nature to be able to express a thought in brevity, 3 minutes or less. There just may be situations where public comment doesn't allow for that information to be disseminated.
Okay.
What I'm trying to do is give a general sense for staff to manage this process. So staff through Christine will say, okay, there's always going to be an exception in a gray area, but with this practice and procedure in place, Christine will know, oh, if this thing came in late, does it pass the standard? Does it pass that hurdle to be considered outside the board packet? It gives staff an litmus test with which to measure. We certainly could move public comment to the beginning. I think that's actually a really good suggestion, quite honestly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Patty, what are you looking for here? Are you looking for a motion? Do you want to adopt this? Do you want general agreement, a straw poll? Or just hear any opposition?
Great question, Laura. What I'd like to do is adopt it as a practice, but certainly we can amend it as we go. I don't see this as a hard and fast. It doesn't necessarily have to be, and we can refine it and work with it, but this gives everybody something to understand how we're going to manage documents.
Would you do us the favor of modifying what you have written to include what you said today, or how you want to do it now, so that we have something in writing? That'd be great.
I can certainly do that, and if you want to wait and have that modified version for the next meeting, we can do that.
I'm fine indicating that something is better than where we're at.
I will reiterate my exceptions that I added. I listed exceptions for emergency items from staff that require action and documents from the public that relate to an item on the agenda proposed for action.
So today we got a letter in support of an application from some towns. So that meets that test, right?
I would say yes. It's an item specifically relative, I think it was to Otter Creek, and that was an action item on today's agenda.
Okay, that's pretty broad.
I understand. I'm trying to adopt a practice that meets the open meeting law for the state of Vermont.
The only challenge I see is if you put the comment period in the front, then those comments could be a month old before they're actually being considered versus the timeliness of having public comment immediately after a meeting.
Well, another
some select boards do both. They ask for public comment in the very beginning, and they ask for public comment at the end. we could adopt that practice.
I'd be interested in that, but then again, there's also be hard to walk it back if it ends up being
Yeah.
exciting.
And we can manage the public comment with time limits, and if it turns into a real time sink, the time limits become shorter.
Well, I was sitting here wondering which is it I would think would be more onerous, 2 public comments or fielding the email that come through at the last minute on various things.
Fielding
I
the
don't know.
email.
Fielding the email is worse?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
because we're all sometimes, all of us are sometimes on the go when we're
Exactly.
signing on to these. So, the
Yeah.
in person is better than I missed the email. So,
Well, can we say this, that any distributions to be considered on however you put that, Patty, matters before the board, come through staff. They're not direct delivered. Occasionally we get direct deliveries from individual parties
you
or
can't stop
individual
that though.
people.
Yes, that's
I
well
don't
said.
have to
Could
be responsible for it though either.
Yeah, okay.
That's well said. Any public document needs to go through staff, through Christine, to get to the board. And I
And what
can
I'm going to start doing personally is flipping anything that comes to me directly to Christine.
exactly.
If it's worthy of being in the board packet or in the board meeting, Christine's is the gatekeeper.
Agreed. Okay, so I'm going to make a motion that we approve this practice as presented in the memo with the addition of the exception for emergency items from staff that require action and documents from the public on items that are on the agenda proposed for action as long as they are going through the executive director of VCBB.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? I do believe Brian is offline at a meeting he could avoid, so it's 4-0 on that one. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for doing the work.
Yep.
Yes, thank you, Patty.
Very welcome. Next up on our agenda is item 8 is governmental affairs. As the legislative season is kicking into gear, we wanted to talk a bit about our representation legislatively, both in Vermont and other locations, in terms of our approach to the face of VCB relative to issues that the lawmakers are considering. And we wanted to just briefly discuss, what is our plan? What is our strategy to be represented? Who will be the face of VCBB across in the State House? At this point, this is a general concept. I'm not talking about any people at this point, but just a general concept. Many of us talked in the past about the importance of this kind of representation on a legislative basis, and I'll just use my own past history at Washington Electric Co-op. And we had a strong legislative liaison, and our person was Court Richardson. It just made the process really smooth and easy, and we had really good relationships built up with lawmakers, key lawmakers, and that understood the WEC position, the Washington Electric Co-op position, to move through the process. And we wanted to talk about, and certainly we have that with Velco. Velco has Carrick Johnson, GMP and VEC have Warren Coleman. It's kind of like a person representing those entities. And we wanted to talk just a little bit about that function and how we pursue that this year in the legislative session. I'll just tee it up with that conceptual framework. Anybody want to jump in and have thoughts? Laura?
Yeah. I think this is going to be very, and I think we already are in a pretty dynamic situation here. We have the $20 million issue, which is not going to be easily resolved. Let me just guarantee that for everyone. BEAD and the alignment around BEAD policies. I think we need to be very careful about that. I know that there are discussions around revenue and consumer protection policy related to telecommunications in the State House. Those certainly could have impact on what we're doing here. We, of course, lost the standalone technology committee that's been smushed in with another committee. There is no technology committee, so to speak, in the Senate. So I think we have some very, very potentially dicey issues in the State House, certainly with our federal partners. I think we've got amazing innovators and problem solvers on our staff that we should have focused on the problems of innovating and solving problems with our CUDs and ISPs. And I would like to see us contract for government affairs this year and on a case-by-case, year-by-year basis.
So like having an outsourced person
Yes.
being the ears and the eyes on the ground.
Yeah.
And across at the State House.
Yeah. That
Yes.
person would be, accountable to Christine as the executive director. Christine, of course, would be keeping us apprised of that in working with that government affairs person.
Mm-hmm. Holly, you had your hand up?
I just wondered what our budget line item is for government affairs.
So we need some funding that is clean. I believe we do have some clean funding. We've got that by clean, I mean funding that has freer use. So I believe we have USF and other funding, but I guess we'd have to check in with staff on that.
Dan, what are your thoughts?
I like the idea. How much it costs, of course, comes into play, but I think it's an area worth investing in, and I think it also gives the staff the ability to focus on the areas of moving I call it a business, moving things along as well.
Christine, what are your reactions to that? If we brought in so basically a contracted entity to help us out?
Well, I think, it really is going to depend. I think the USF, I texted Tony saying to check into the USF to see if that's an allowed expense. I don't have any opposition to it. I will say that in anticipation of this coming up, we looked at staff and said who would be best to do this. So we thought Heron would be the good person to do this, and Heron certainly was willing to do it. But again, I guess it depends on what our grant requirements. If we're specifically not allowed to do this within the grants, then I'd say we'd have to use a staff member for it. I don't see any other alternative.
Do we have room in the budget that we could fund it in our current ARPA?
I don't think I'm almost, let's put it this way, I'm subject to check. I just got a note from our that it's not allowed. It's not allowed in ARPA. It's not allowed in BEAD. USF is the only source of funds that I can think of. But again, I have to check. I didn't expect to. I didn't anticipate this question that we're going to go outside for funding for this meeting.
Yeah, and there's so I think there's a number of rollover funds that came from the department over potentially. So,
Yeah,
I mean,
so what I hear from the board is a recommendation to hire an outside group to do this, who specializes, of course, in this area. But I don't have an answer for you where that funding could come from at this point.
so may I, Patty?
Yeah, go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, I think, my opinion, Heron is a fine suggestion. I also would, given the issues that we're talking about here, if we were able to secure an experienced Vermont lobbyist who is not otherwise contracted with one of the major telecoms, which is that's a feat, but someone who has experienced relationships, particularly with the relevant committees that we know we're going to have to engage with. I think that in this year might be a good idea.
And one of the things that I learned, some lessons learned in the electric world, is that person being, in person in the hallways is so valuable. And
Mhm.
it's really about the relationship building in the sense of they're going to be made contact with by lawmakers if they're a respected individual and known individual. And the way to do that is you have to press the flesh. You've got to be on site. You got to be in the meetings. You got to be credible. I'm not saying Heron is not that person, but it's somebody that's got to be there all the time.
Right.
And I think Heron's remote, Ludlow, and doing other things, and might be able to juggle it and be there for part of the time. But it's the important piece of this is that it's a person who's there. Basically, that's their job all the time, and they're that face. And I've seen the work that others that have that position do for their respective entities, and when you get a good one, it is just completely a valuable piece of information or function that we have. And with the money that we're working on and the significant issues we have in play, I think it's imperative we get this and get it right. It can't be a training opportunity. It's got to be somebody who knows kind of the process and somebody who can really deliver for us.
Yeah, I hear the desire and the will of the board. I hear the desire and will of the board, and we will definitely move forward with that desire and will. And the caveat will be Tony will check to see,
Okay.
where and if we're able to pull that off from the funding sources we currently have.
Okay.
Yeah, I would strongly urge that there's a way for us to do this. So.
And if any board members have thoughts, I'm not asking you to, blurt out companies or names at this point. If you have thoughts of any entities or people that would be good, please pass those on to Christine and copy our group so that we have names. I wouldn't want to do this in a public session. I don't think that's the right way to do that. Laura?
Yeah, I would just know, and I think all of the board members are aware of this, but I would not want to see us go with a lobbying firm that had a national telecom client. I know they put up walls in theory, but I really would not want us to do that. So. Oh.
You're muted.
Holly, you are muted.
Having been at Downs, Rockland, and Martin, I can tell you conflict of interest is the name of the game in Vermont. And what is really important is the skill set of that person. And one of the things I so appreciate about this suggestion is that person, if they're really highly skilled, can bring Christine or a board member into the conversation as necessary,
right,
and make the VCBB strategic in how they deploy that very special resource, and really make sure that we aren't setting anyone up for constantly being tagged in the hallway, which is really dangerous.
Well said, Holly. When you've got somebody with the appropriate skills, it's just it's like a symphony playing. Everything is in tune and it's smooth. And like you said, it doesn't mean they handle all the issues. They consult and bring people in as needed.
Well, I'll summarize to, it's clear to me this strong will of the board. You certainly don't get any opposition from us on this. I don't have any reason to argue or even bring up any issues. So I think it would be a great resource. So I think what we'll do is we'll move forward, come back. I don't think we need a resolution at this point. I think we'll come back to the next meeting after researching this, and then the board, we can make a suggested resolution at that point too.
As
Okay.
much as I respect Laura Sebelia's recommendation that there not be a conflict among the clients held by the professional, we need somebody who understands telecom.
I think more so we need somebody who understands the building.
Oh, that's true.
That is where we really.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Excellent. All right, anything else on item 8, governmental affairs? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to Vikuda update. Rob Betsky.
I feel like you guys need a deep sigh or something before we go on to the next part of the agenda here, so I'll do it for you. That's a lot, and certainly I think we all appreciate the complexity and the volume of issues that the board has been taking and the staff have been taking in the last few weeks, and how that's kind of just really ramped up in all the work you've been doing in the subcommittees and here. So thank you, and I'll do an update after that. So a couple of Vikuda updates. Our committees are kind of flourishing. I think we have a new policy coordinator helping out and is doing a wonderful job about a month into his activity here. And our committees are kind of starting to really come to life as a result of all the work Andrew's doing to kind of staff them and help us pick up the pace. Of course, we have capacity problem now in terms of people to attend all of these meetings that are getting scheduled, but that's something we'll deal with as we go. So Legislative and Policy Committee has started planning for 2024, as you would expect. Laura mentioned the, kind of the big picture items that are there. There are some technical corrections and other things that we deferred last year, but restoring the 20 million, the revenue changes that are being discussed, including the Vermont Universal Service Fund, and the Consumer Protection Bill and its impact on broadband clearly are high on the list for that group. And we've started talking about all of those. The Finance Committee issued an RFP over the last month and has selected and hired an individual to help lead the development of the shared services programs that are funded by the Northern Borders Grant. And so really happy, Denise Sullivan, she's a Vermont expert with a lot of tax and accounting experience and experience across a number of agencies and distributed programs, will be leading that. Now, that doesn't mean she's doing all the work. What we've asked her to do is to do the needs analysis, and she's starting by talking to all of the CUDs about what they see would be beneficial in shared services from a finance and HR perspective. She's going to come back in about a month and give us a readout of her findings. And then we'll probably do some additional RFPs or additional sourcing of resources to actually implement those programs. We kind of hired her as the expert to lead the program, not necessarily to implement all of the program. So step one is that continuation of the survey and some of the needs analysis we did last year, and kind of really putting a expert opinion on some of the findings from that. Okay, number 4, BEAD. So obviously, congratulations to all of you, the staff, especially in Vernonburg, but to the board as well for approving Volume 1. I think we liked where it came out, and particularly the attempt to kind of put some more rigorous process around determining addresses served by wireless and how that would be done. So we thought that looked great. We scrambled when the board book came out last week to get a first read of BEAD Volume 2. And we had one meeting, and a number of the items that you all started to discuss today clearly came right to the forefront. There are some substantial policy declarations that are a little different. There certainly are implementation and workflow differences in terms of selecting grantees and recommending them to the NTIA. They're different than the workflow that we're used to with ARPA grants. And then, of course, there are things like the financial impact of some of the BEAD requirements and how those work into sustainability plans. So, an enormous amount of work. We are going to continue to meet and work on those comments. We're happy to have another month to provide them. I think, just as a preview, Lucy announcing she won't be with us a year from now actually provided an interesting foil for some of the language in the draft that we really need to make sure that it is precise and the intent is carried out in the language. And there are a number of places where we felt the language was imprecise and that a new person reading it a year from now might interpret the intent differently than probably what's there. And so I think we'll be making a lot of comments about language, certainly some substantive ones around things around the selection process and the affordability requirements and accountability requirements and all of those kinds of things. But generally, an amazing amount of work, great progress, and happy to see in print something that we can react to, and we're looking forward to the comment period. Let's see. Just one note on that. So one CUD has already come up with 9 pages of questions and comments that we need to go through. It's a 90-page document. That's actually pretty good. But gives you a sense of the volume of activity that it's going to take for us to provide input on that. So again, thank you for the great progress, and we'll keep moving on. 2 other things that were mentioned previously. So Vikuda participated in and almost all of the CUDs, actually CUDs unanimously supported our signing on to, and most of them also signed on to themselves, the Connect Humanity and American Association of Public Broadband letter to Secretary of Commerce Raimondo and the NTIA about the letter of credit. And, again, what that letter calls on is the NTIA to reconsider the arbitrary requirements for letter of credit that they borrowed from NTIA. They borrowed from Department of Agriculture and Russ and kind of inserted into the NTIA NOFO when it wasn't required by the law, and really asking them to come back on that. We understand NTIA is listening, that the letter had some impact. They got a letter from 3 Republican senators and 3 independent senators today. We understand that they're going to get some more letters from other folks. We had a good call with some of the Vermont delegation, and they seem to be supportive and certainly very aware of the letter of credit problems. So I think there's going to continue to be a groundswell there. It's really important we continue to emphasize how important it is to get that pulled out of the NTIA requirements. Then I guess the last one is just a little bit of good news, and Janelle will probably be sharing this in her own comments, but CV Fiber has its first 6 friendly customers online. And so another great milestone for CUDs in Vermont. That's it, unless there are any questions.
Congratulations, CV Fiber. That's awesome.
Thank you very much. Yes, this is a lot of good news for us. And we've got already some great feedback from our friendlies. We're now completing the testing of the network that includes the customer service billing end of it. And we'll be able to offer, once we complete the testing process, we'll be offering our services to the general population in our first DA.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Rob. Next on our agenda is public comment.
Okay, we're opening up for public comment. We'll limit limit your points to 3 minutes or less. And raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment. And we'll pick you in the order that your hand is raised. So anybody who wants to make a comment, please raise your hand. We've got Irv Tomei. Irv, go ahead.
There. Have I activated my microphone?
You are activated, yes.
Okay. This will not substitute for a possible more lengthy written comment later, but following closely the discussion this afternoon about the affordability topic as is presented in the draft for public comment. First, I'm deeply concerned about publishing to the public for public comment a number which may not actually come to pass. I thank Holly as a board member for pointing out that number may not be sustainable, might render some CUDs unsustainable. Given that doubt, I think it raises public expectations unrealistically. And I think that's a dangerous thing to do. I would also point out that not only is that price for ongoing service unrealistic, but the statement that there would be no charges for connection will require somebody somehow to find a separate fund to connect low-income subscribers. Because the sad fact is that many low-income Vermonters live in mobile homes. And it seems the National Electric Code requires utilities to be delivered to mobile homes in conduit. And that makes connecting a mobile home more expensive than connecting a more expensive home by an overhead so-called drop. And telecom people call it a drop. And we were fortunate in EC Fiber a couple of years ago that there was some state funding that could be applied, and we connected a large number of mobile home residents with that special funding. But that's not an ongoing available fund. So I'm bringing this up, speaking as someone affiliated with probably the most financially solid CUD in the state right now. If it's worrying us, it's a big worry for other CUDs. So please be careful that you don't put CUDs in a situation of public discontent where it appears that promises have been made that nobody's able to keep. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Irv. Who would like to be next? Raise your hand if you'd like to make a statement. Nope, FX Flynn. Go ahead, FX.
Yeah, thank you. Since Irv spoke to this, I thought I would raise an ancillary point that I was otherwise going to hold off and work through during public comments. But you have to understand that when we got started with EC Fiber to create a business that would operate an ISP in these 21 towns that didn't even have a hint that they would ever see cable. We had to sit down and pencil out not only what it was going to cost, what kind of staffing we would have, what kind of ongoing maintenance there would be. All of those costs needed to be developed. And then the question was, how many people in our area are going to sign up and at what price so that we can get to a top line revenue that will take care of paying back the debt, take care of paying staff, take care of maintenance, cover the cost of getting audited, dealing with all the other expenses. And what we arrived at was that we needed to average $100 per customer, and we needed to have at least 6 customers per mile. Now, that's for the district as a whole, all built out at the end of the day. We have successfully remained solvent, paid everybody, pay our debts, issue our bonds and all that. You know, right now we're at like a little over 5 customers per mile, but on the other hand, our average revenue per customer is $104. Okay.
Yeah, 30 seconds, Apex.
And the base price that we have is $72 a month, which we get for people who qualify for ACP for $30. And we supplement it with another $20, we get it down to $22. We would not be able to go forward if that $45 rule
you're at 3 minutes, FX.
were in place. And I think the board will probably like to have me shut up now, so I will.
Thanks, FX. Okay.
I'd like to get some feedback on the board on what Irv and I just reported.
Okay, Paul Fix, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm chair of Northeast Kingdom Broadband, and first of all, let me offer my apologies that Krista is engaged elsewhere and isn't here, because I know she will be interested to watch the recording of your talk about BEAD. We too have concerns about the $45 affordability amount, and if I have read the document correctly, it does seem that the suggestion is to meet a $75 amount, which we believe we could sustainably meet, perhaps with some of our own affordability programs. So I know you were kicking around what numbers to put in there, but the BEAD document seems to have a suggestion, and it is curious and concerning to us that you would lower that for some reason. So as you debate and discuss what the public document might look like, I put that out there for suggestion. I'd also like to indicate we do have a working group that's very carefully looking at possibilities to provide our own affordability program, and we will try to share some outline of where we think that might go, so that your BEAD proposals might allow independently stood up programs rather than a firm price that we might have to live with. Sustainability is obviously of great concern to us, as others have indicated that it is for them. And because we have revenue streams, that's something we look at pretty carefully. And, we hope that the VCBB looks at that with regard to all CUDs. And I'm sure you'll hear from us and Bakuda and others about your discussions in that area. And I think that's it. Thank you very much for the hard work in doing this. I think we're optimistic going forward that our build might be mostly grant funded with whatever matches are needed. So we look forward to moving forward on this and being able to offer our customers the lowest possible price through a municipal organization. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Ellie, go ahead.
Hi there, thank you. Just a couple quick points. I did want to echo the point that Irv made about possibly not including a specific target value in the version for public comment, solely for the reason of setting expectations with the general public as opposed to the more informed public, the CUDs and service providers that are listening to this meeting and have probably already looked at the board pack to see it. So just something for consideration. And I also wanted to point out, although I know that many of you are aware of it, but the Affordable Connectivity Program has a limited amount of funding, which is currently projected to run out next year, April, May, give or take. And it's not entirely clear what the feds are going to do. So just wanted to throw that into the mix as well. And I think that the output discussed earlier in the meeting, whereby staff would take this up and discuss with stakeholders, is absolutely right. I don't think we should get into too much detail at this level, but I did want to make a couple of comments for the board's consideration and for the public record. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. Anybody else? Going once? Going twice? Okay, I think we're done with public comment. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. Okay, so I think you're on mute, Patty.
The next item on the agenda is parking lot. If you want to tee that up for us, Christine.
Sure. On the parking lot, you know, the items that are on the parking lot are the accountability items that were developed by the board. And I know I should say we'll say from staff, we appreciate all the hard work the board has been doing on this, and they've been I think we all agree, including those participating from the CUDs, that this have been very good meetings. But of course, you've completed the ex parte discussion, so we'll close that one. And we have two items to add to the parking lot. One is the request today to produce an overlay of the BEAD timelines and the grant requests and the upcoming work of the board meetings. So we'll produce that for you for the next meeting, as well as an update to the board on the BEAD versus ARPA requirements. Do I have anything else that should be on that list?
I think you.
Go ahead, Holly.
I think you have an action item regarding governmental affairs.
Oh, that's right. Thank you. Yep. Thank you. Okay, got them so noted.
Quickly, have all the subgroups met?
Yes.
Multiple times.
Yeah, some many times, yeah.
Just want to make sure we're all in motion.
Did we set a target date?
We had targeted end of October to have all the policies done.
Okay.
It's target. It's a good shot. Laura?
Yeah, so can I just talk about the policy committee that I'm working on for a second here? So it feels a little different. So it's the sunset provision in Act 71. So do we feel like, although I guess FX actually has indicated it's probably helpful to know where how we'll make those decisions sooner rather than later so that we have that in contracts. But I just was wondering about if that could take a little bit more time, if there was such a big rush on that. We're talking about developing a process for reviewing. It's just looking for some feedback on if that needs to be by the end of October. We are targeted to meet. We have 2 more meetings coming up. So, I mean, we're plugging away at it, but hearing people talk about everything that's going on.
Go ahead, Holly.
I'm a little confused. I thought you were talking about the sunset of the VCBB.
Yes, I am.
Okay, so we're talking about enforceability standards in our lien conversations, and we're talking about affordability standards, which have contractual ramifications, and you're talking about elements that have to do with who's going to be there to enforce provisions. Have I got that right?
Yes.
Okay. There are some interlane. So that my thought on that, Laura, being a party of one, is that the sunset policy of the board is really more about a legislative matter than it is about the terms that are going to go into the grant agreements.
And so I would be in favor of giving you more time to develop what is essentially a legislative position.
It's, well, what I believe we're going to be developing is a process for the board to consider where we are in terms of, because we have to make recommendations to the legislature. So what are the criteria by which we will make that recommendation? What are the timeframes within, you know, that we have to consider? What do we have to know? Other complicating things. So,
Yeah, which is
okay.
different from our annual reporting requirements.
Yeah, it feels a little less time sensitive. But we'll just slightly less. Not that it's not time sensitive.
I can imagine issuing grants without knowing what the
Yes.
sunset date of the board is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. But we're just that we're providing for the VCBB or its successor, right? Right. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
On this topic of the committees, Patty, it kind of begs the question to me whether we board members should be in the parking lot ourselves, having sort of a summary update of what's going on in these committees before we hit the bingo, all done.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps, what is our next meeting date? We have another meeting in September, correct?
That's an open question.
Yeah, I think we did a poll and we're September 21st looks like it worked, but we don't get a full board. We only get 3 board members. We had to really struggle to get a quorum, and 21st was the date we got the quorum. But, you know, that's really up to the board. There's not a lot of pressure from staff side to have a meeting. We don't have anything, but it's really.
I mean, my suggestion would be to do updates at this next September meeting, but I'm going to be one of those people not on for the 21st because I'm away.
I'm not here. A comment on that is we're getting constant feedback in these sessions, so I don't think there will be any surprise, or at least there should never be any surprise. So it's fast moving, up to date, and there's no hit the button.
How do I know what you're doing over in
exactly.
your group?
So do we want to do that here, or do we want to create a forum where we can read what each other is doing?
Oh, good idea. May I?
Which is the good idea, the read or do it right now?
No, I have an idea.
Go ahead.
Do people want to read like the minutes and the agendas from the various subcommittees? Are those things that are going out?
That's what
Like,
I was sort of suggesting is perhaps we could just see into each other's folder and read how things are progressing, what the content is.
That's a good way to slice this. Because we all have access to all the subfolders.
And it just keeps this meeting moving along, I think.
Exactly. I think that's an excellent suggestion.
Rob Pitsky has his hand up.
It was just a quick comment that we're going through exactly the same thing, trying to figure out what's happening in different committees and keep people coordinated. So I don't know if there's a way that could be shared with the committee members. That would be helpful.
You can share it in the committees.
If it's the will of the board, we could share the links to other committee members.
Yeah, why not just have those like when the minutes and like on an agenda? I don't know.
I mean, it essentially makes every committee open to everyone, and I just think it's too much. I mean, this is why we made committees, right?
Is everything posted in a public place, the agendas and There's a question.
Well, it's not a public place, but we have links. Each committee has a link to a folder with all the information on those folders, which we could open up to the other board members as well, if that's.
There's nothing that stops a committee member from sharing around to their friends and neighbors what is happening in the committee, I suppose. But I don't want to make it so that this is a lot to manage anyway, right? A lot of input. I think we're going to have public hearings on these policies. And in fact, on the affordability policy, I can tell you the committee's inclination is to hold a separate public hearing on affordability policy to get more generalized public input because it's affordability. That's a proposal that hasn't come before the board yet, but I don't know. I'm not a good Robin Hood person, one for all and all for one.
So I'm assuming that we don't have to have these minutes and agendas available to the public if they are not currently now.
They're not
Well,
public meetings.
It's not a public meeting. It's not a quorum. And I do think, Tony, I'll throw this over to you, Tony. I do think there's allowance in the public meeting law for reading materials, but I'm not sure. That's just me shooting at the dark. So we can have Tony check on that. We want to make sure that whatever we do, if we share with other board members, we want to make sure it complies with open meeting law.
Yeah,
Right. Well, I mean, our working groups are not quorums, so they're not public meetings.
Is there any
But
reason
it's
we
up to-
couldn't post those minutes and agendas? That seems like the least intrusive way. So it's up. If people want it, they can go and read it.
Do you want to post minutes? I mean, minutes seem pretty preliminary. I think we have to get more substantial work product before we post anything. Otherwise, we're going to get dragged back into like minutia,
Okay.
right? So maybe we define an intermediate work product to post or to share that is pre-final.
Which is a lot like taking comments in a hearing.
That's a great suggestion, though, to post a draft policy, what we're proposing. Take input, take feedback. Here's what we throw out. Here's our first draft. Poke at it.
October 9th.
Have it ready for October 9, our first draft. I think that's feasible. It's first draft, not final.
We've had a first draft.
You're ahead of the curve.
No. Tony, Laura, and I believe there has been a first draft.
Yes, we do.
What the committees are now doing is a second draft, a second preliminary draft.
Understood.
Thank you.
Yeah, understood. Let's
Okay, so
target October 9th to have the sub-working groups come up with their latest proposal. And then folks can react and respond.
Okay.
This is probably bad timing to let you all know. I will have the consumer protection standard subgroup policy out by 10/9, but I'm away from October 9th through the 17th, not accessible to the internet in Minnesota. So I won't be available for going to mushing boot camp.
Ooh, exciting.
Are you going to be at the October 9th meeting?
Nope.
Okay. So some other board member will take the lead.
Dan's on.
Yeah, Dan's on, right, there you go.
Dan's it.
He's going to make us recite our proposed policies by heart.
I think I can do that one.
Okay, so are we good at this point?
So when we are meeting in September again?
It sounds like the 21st was the date.
21st of the date is up, that's,
But what's on the agenda at this point?
we have nothing from staff at this point.
I could use more time on my subcommittees as opposed to another board meeting.
How does this jive with the requirements from BEAD? So we have that overlay. Are we gonna be getting, is there anything crunchy that we're gonna miss? I'm
Good
fine with
question.
getting rid of it, so.
Yeah, we don't have the next BEAD board item is a vote in November on initial proposal volume 2, but we were hoping to save space. We can save space at the October meeting as well to just have a conversation. The next action item needed is to vote in the November meeting on volume 2.
But there might be a review needed at the end of October, beginning of November on the digital equity side of things.
Right. And what about this whole affordability conversation we've had today? When would the board's opportunity to hear about that come up?
So we could add that on the October meeting. If the board wants to hold space to just do a general kind of continue volume 2 conversation.
And Patty, if I got it right, you're going to be gone September 21 as well?
I am.
Okay. So I just as soon work on my committee assignments.
Okay,
Yep.
so no meeting in September, no second meeting in September.
So then October 9th, and you're not gonna be here then, Patty,
Right, I won't be there for the 9th.
and Dan will be? Cause that seems like it's gonna be a big meeting.
Yeah, I can be.
Okay. All right, so we've done confirm next meeting. So staff introductions, new staff.
Yeah, we have 3 new staff members to introduce. I've asked them to do like a brief resume of their background for the job. We really have some nice candidates, you'll see. And we'll start with Stephen Zubkoff. Stephen is our community economic development person, formerly known as the Broadband project developer. Go ahead, Stephen. If you're talking, Stephen, you're muted. Stephen hasn't quite got the hang of unmuting yet, so. And if you're having technical problems, I can text us if you're having technical problems, Stephen. And
Let's come back to him.
all right, let's come back to him. Chance is our administrative services person. He's been awesome, military background, really putting the discipline in place for very timely with the board discussion. So go ahead, Chance.
Good afternoon. I think actually I've met all of the board members now that we've been working in these groups. Just a summary of my background. As Christine alluded to, I was in the United States Marine Corps. After that, I moved around the country a bit and settled back here in Vermont, where I grew up. I just retired after 15 years as an assistant chief of a fire department in EMT. I have one daughter who graduated college. She's also a firefighter EMT and works for FSD as a social worker. I've been with the state for 12 years now, officially as of last week. And I'm just hoping to be as useful as possible here to help the board. That's all I got.
Chance, what other departments of the state did you work in?
Yes, I started with the Department of Labor, and I worked up through as a customer service rep up to the REA, which was reemploying folks that were unemployed back in the 2011, 2012. I also worked for the disaster unemployment. Myself and Chris were the two folks that ran the disaster unemployment back in for the Irene event. And then after Department of Labor, I went over to BGS, where I used a lot of my EMT skills. I was doing safety training and emergency training for buildings and doing CPR and stop the bleed courses. And then I went over to Homeland Security under the Department of Public Safety, doing Homeland Security counterterrorism grants. And now I'm here.
Great, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's certainly been very helpful for staff. Thank you, Chance. It's like, in fact, I don't know what we did without him. I don't know how we survived without you, Chance. So thank you. And I'll talk. Alexei Montserrat is starting next Monday, but he happens to be at the board meeting when he asked him if he'd be willing to do an introduction. He is our broadband, rural broadband technical specialist that will be replacing Lucy. Of course, Lucy's agreed to do an overlap to help make that transition as smooth as possible. But Alexei, why don't you give you an introduction and talk a little bit about your background? And I can see that I spell your name wrong. It's an E before I, as opposed to I before E.
It is. Yes,
okay.
It's true. Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I grew up here in Vermont as well, and went to college and graduate school down in Washington, D.C., where I was for about 25 years in a couple different capacities, partly the environmental NGO world, and then into the federal government, working for the U.S. State Department in a number of different capacities, mostly out of D.C., but occasionally overseas. I then went to the Atlantic Council, which is a think tank down there in Washington, and was the director of their Global Business and Economics program for a number of years, and then went abroad as they say, trailing spouse, with my wife, who is a Foreign Service officer. I have now relocated back here to Vermont, and am very much looking forward to working with the group. And it's been a fascinating discussion today, and looking forward to diving into all of these challenges.
And Alexei's had a lot of the boots on the ground experience with communities in foreign countries. So I'm very impressed, and his references were incredible. So that was just remarkable, your references. So thank you, Alexei, for agreeing to join us.
And Alexei, welcome. How many languages do you know?
A few at a fairly cursory level, but most of the time I was actually working in English, either through an interpreter or local groups.
Gotcha. It's always complicated navigating and understanding new cultures, and even the
Indeed.
You know, identifying the nuances of language are very tricky.
That is certainly true.
Yeah, welcome aboard.
Thanks.
Okay, checking on Stephen again. Have you you got your technical issues resolved? You still there, Stephen?
Hey, Christine. Yeah, I am here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, very good.
Sorry. I'm in an area of West Fairleigh, Vermont, and unfortunately, we don't have full service yet.
So anyway, Stephen, just Stephen's our community economic development person, and he's got a tremendous background in grants and housing. But Stephen, give a little bit background about yourself.
Yeah, I started off in affordable housing. We managed and owned a very large portfolio of a government-assisted Section 8 housing. About 25 years ago, we created a campus of opportunity to provide internet connectivity in our properties. We worked with a nonprofit called One Economy, which was able to get significant in-kind donations for hardware and software, as well as create a content hub called the Beehive that created content in 11 languages for low-income Americans. You know, where to find healthcare for your kids and that type of thing. So that was my first introduction to the issues around digital equity, the digital divide, and so I'm really thrilled to be able to be back in that space and working with Christine and the team here at VCBB.
And Stephen, where were you owning the properties?
Mostly in urban areas all around the country. We had 110,000 units, so
Holy
there
cow.
were probably every major metropolitan. Yeah, we were partners with the Enterprise Foundation, and so Jim Rouse was my mentor and boss. He founded the Enterprise Foundation and also Rouse Companies, which was one of the larger, real estate development companies in the country.
Great, thank you. Welcome aboard.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, that's our new staff. I think I can safely say we're fully staffed. And we're all
Okay, thanks.
excited to keep, yeah.
Thank you very much. It's great to meet the 3 new folks that have come on, and looking forward to interacting with them on our regular meetings. And is there anything else that we have on the agenda today?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, I move we adjourn.
Second.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, bye-bye.